Okay, greetings, brothers and sisters. For me to look at my view count, I have my YouTube page set on 110 in terms of its size, 110%. And so I have to scroll over, look at the view count, and then even farther, which I never do, to look at the thumbs up and things like that. Because, that stuff isn't really all that important. I mean, in terms of, it's important to the algorithms and all those things, but to me, it's just, I mean, it doesn't register an emotional response. But the views are important. Of course, the money is more important in terms of how much money I'm making per video, in terms of this being a job, right? Or in terms of it being a job or just a hobby. And so, the last video that I released, or not the last one, the one of 2 days ago, is at 555,584 video views, and more drones is at 6,000. And the other ones are pretty close to 5,000, which was kind of what I was, like an average, I think. But per day, because there's more than a few videos that people are viewing, wherever that averages out per day, which I'm not going to do right now. So what I'm kind of saying is my view count went back up a little bit. I'm not sure what's up. And one person said they're not getting the notifications anymore. They were, and now they're not. It's an ongoing thing. It's fluid. But I wanted to start off today. I've been talking about Jesus, not Jesus, the Bible. There's a difference between Jesus and the Bible, and I'm going to get into that. And religion in general, and the difference between religion and spirituality. And I read the book of Revelations. And so there was a person who commented and said this. So this was a book. This was a thing where I said you don't want to hear this, but it needs to be said. So that's a video of a couple days ago, and it's where I read the book of Revelation, and I talk about it more extensively in the last video, which is entitled "Use Your Noggin." It's responding to a comment there, but in general, and there was the comment to this. The person was speaking about here is the book of Revelations, and what they said was this. I'm going to read the whole comment, and then you should have kept reading, because I stopped reading because it just was kind of getting goofy, and you should have kept reading. The happy ending is the new earth and the new heaven that the people of God inherit. Not that all good people go to heaven. The Bible doesn't even say that anyone will be in heaven except Jesus, who sits at the right hand of the Father. But even he rules 1,000 years before the last judgment. The wicked won't repent, and here comes the seals, and not all will die. You should keep reading. You should have kept reading. And this is, I don't want to call it like it's like a childish comment, because it lacks understanding of what other people's point of view is, right? Because the only reason that you think it's the book of Revelations is good is because you believe in the Bible as a source of truth, right? As an authority. It's just like what we deal with sheeple. Sheeple think that mainstream media is truth, right? Is, the authority on truth, or is the, reliable sources, as they say on CNN, right? It's all about who's a reliable source. And that's what the whole debate is, right? The whole debate is who is, where you're going to get your truth from. I mean, that's the question of our time now, because of the age of the internet. Where are you going to get your truth? Who is speaking truth? Who is a trusted source? Who is a reliable source? Who is the authority, right? Because most of the stuff that you hear is just opinion, or it's somebody's subjective experience. because people have a lens in which they see the world. And that lens is distorted by prejudice and ignorance and emotion and desire and all these things, right? Your lens is distorted by what you want to have happen and your prejudices about whatever, is going on in terms of that time. It could be racial prejudices, but now it's more belief prejudices. People talk about racism and things like that. But we've entered in a time where it's about what people believe. You're more prejudiced, you prejudge people based on what they believe, or based on what group that they fall into, more than even the color of people's skin or the country that they live in. It's more like people. I mean, when you're a truther, you want people like you who share their disdain and their lack of trust of the mainstream story and the governments, right? When this person says that I should have kept on reading because it has a happy ending, I don't believe in this, what's being said there, right? So the book of Revelations, there is somebody named John. So I looked this up fairly recently because it interested me. When I was a kid, I was interested in the apocalypse because I'm an apocalyptic kind of person, right? Like I was interested in it, not in some gloom and doom type of way. It's kind of interesting thing, whatever. And the Bible was the Bible. Like when I grew up, the Bible was the Bible. To me, like it was a source of it was God's word or whatever. Like I was a kid, whatever I felt about it. And, I believed in it. Like it was something that I didn't question. Just like I didn't question, when you're a kid, you don't question things like this, right? Your parents are your parents, and you think your parents are great until you realize they're not. I mean, this happens to, people when you wake up to your parents' flaws. Like when you're a little kid, your parents are like gods. And, you might see some flaws and stuff in them, but they don't really register till you're like a teenager. You're 10, 8, 9, 10 as you get older. And you realize, my parents, like, I can't, trust them. To the point where, like, to me, they were less than me. Like, at some point, like, I was like, I think I'm better than my parents are. Right? Maybe I'll start off this video with a picture. There's a picture of me and my mom and my dad at a gathering. Or maybe it was at the Grand Canyon. There was a gathering in Molina, Georgia. There's two pictures. I think I'll put both of them up here. And I'll go back and forth between them or whatever else. Or I don't know what I'll do. But my parents were, like, flawed. Like, when I was in 8th grade, I caught my parents lying. In a bad lie. And it was about me. And I was just like, well, that's messed up. And they were like children. Like, I was talking to them like they were the children and I was the adult, which was also effed up, right? Because I'm like, this shouldn't be the case. And there's a variety of times in my life my parents let me know that they were incompetent and I couldn't trust them. Like, I was talking to my wife the other day about I take tests well. Like, I was always good at taking tests. Some people are good at it, some people aren't. And one of the reasons was I was never stressed out by a test because I had, school was just something I had to be at. Like, I didn't even know why I was at school. And I took the SATs, and I always, this is something that bothers me now, too. Like, I have this thing where there's something that gets irritated in my throat. And, like, tears will well up in my eyes. And now that I get sore throats from talking too much and, doing whatever I do here, whatever the reason is, it's kind of more of a problem now. Like, it's just there was something there. And, I cough and I can't function. I just got to, drink some water and, as a kid, whatever. But in the SATs, you just had to sit there. I don't think they let you bring water bottles in or whatever. At least I didn't have any. We didn't do shit like that back then. You had a water fountain when like, kids didn't carry around water bottles with them. And so I'm sitting there in the SATs, and I have this experience where this thing's irritating my throat, and tears well up in my eyes. And like the last 20% of the test or whatever, I just went down and filled it out without even reading the questions, right? And so, like, I could have done a lot better in the SATs. So my wife was like, well, why didn't you take it again? And I was like, well, I had no idea what it was for. Like, I was, pretty clueless. I was smoking a lot of pot back then. I had the head injury, but I just was, in this days period, this Rahu period. But my dad was a fucking guidance counselor, right? Rita and Ralph Romano are my parents. And so my dad was a freaking guidance counselor, right? My best friend from high school, my dad wrote a letter of recommendation for him. And I was like not involved in that at all, right? My dad never once talked to me about like what I was going to do post. We didn't have one conversation in like, I don't know, my entire high school. Like there was no, he didn't do any guidance counselor thing for any of my family members. My siblings met people who my dad got into colleges, and they said, "Oh, he was a really great guidance counselor," but he did nothing for his kids in terms of helping them plan their lives and doing the things that, like, his one skill he had, and he was good at it at work. He didn't use it at home, and he was pretty much incompetent about everything else, right? Like parents were just like almost criminally incompetent. And like my thing was my thing too. Whatever it was, like, and I didn't respect my parents, and it was whatever it was. Like I don't know how much I would have listened to them, but there was no sense of that, right? I just like at some point I realized that they were not an authority anymore. Like I had to figure. I knew more than them about life. Like I was already better at life than they were, and I wasn't good at it. Like I wasn't like killing it. Like I was underachieving, and I was still more conscious. It was really about being conscious. Like I was more aware and awake and alive, and more conscious than they were, right? Like if I had a problem and I went to them, they had no way of dealing with it. Like it wouldn't even be, it was just a silly idea. And so but before that, when I was a kid, I thought my parents were, whatever they were, right? They were the authority, and I trusted in them, and like you just do that. And so at some point, that is your government, that is your religion, that is your every aspect of your life. You end up questioning it, and if it sucks, it doesn't stand the scrutiny, and the Bible doesn't stand the scrutiny. Again, if you're a Christian, I'm not trying to, like there's plenty of Christian channels out there. There's plenty of Christian truthers and people who believe in the Bible. And so this is a place where that's not the case, right? And so when this person says to me, you should have kept reading because if you kept on reading, you would have believed in what you're reading. I don't look at the Bible as a reliable source because it's not. The Bible is constructed by not Jesus. Jesus doesn't have one thing that he wrote in there. These are other people's interpretations and opinions of Jesus. And they were at whatever level they were at, but they weren't higher than Jesus was, right? They weren't better and more evolved than Jesus. They were writing about Jesus. And that's in the New Testament. The Old Testament's horrible. It's a bad religion. It's a bad approach to God. Because each religion, it's about the nature of divinity and an understanding of God. And the Old Testament's like about a demon. It's not about God at all. It's not even like the way that God is a narcissist and these things, right? And then the Bible was translated into multiple languages, and it was edited, and stories were edited out, and they started to shape in the Council of Nicaea, amongst other events. The Bible was reshaped by people, and the reason they reshaped it was to create a character named Jesus. It was no longer an actual portrayal of Jesus' life. They scrubbed the things that they didn't think would be good for them, right? They didn't, the things that weren't good for them. And they put in stories, especially where they emphasize stories, especially the one of John 3:16 and the other ones that made Jesus the only Son of God, which is not the case. Because Jesus himself calls God our Father. And there's a prayer called Our Father who art in heaven. How can it be our Father and Jesus is different? What are we, fucking stepchildren, right? No, we're all children of God, just like animals are. And if you believe that, it would be different. It's a religion that fucks you because if you believe that you're a child of God, your life would be completely different. If you believe that, you're also God's child, then Jesus isn't special because he's not. Nobody is. All of us have God in us, right? All of us our soul is, the same. The soul for each person is the same. It's different because it's, a soul is individual, but the soul itself is the same. The soul energy. Your position in the world, your position in the spiritual universe, the etheric universe, is what makes you more evolved or not evolved. is how far you've returned back to your journey back to the source. And so your soul is making that journey, your etheric bodies. And so you have, these etheric bodies that are associated with your soul that are spiritual in nature. And those things are different and more evolved and more, based in your experiences, based in the tests you've passed, based in your consciousness. And so the consciousness of a person is different than the consciousness of a dog. And the consciousness of a dog is different than a consciousness of, say, I don't know, a mouse. It's expanded. Like you're more sophisticated. Dogs are more sophisticated than a mouse. A mouse is more sophisticated than a worm, right? And so it goes on like that. A worm is more sophisticated than a rock. Like these things have, different vibrations, different levels, and the capacity for, human being has a lot more capacity for so many different experiences. We can get into a fucking plane and fly to the other, part of the world. Well, I guess an animal could do that, but an animal can't build the plane or, understand what is happening, right? And so, like, our dogs, we go traveling, our dogs are in the car and they get out and they go, look, we're here. Like, we're at the beach or, whatever it is, right? They have they get in the car and they're not, sure what's happening. They go to sleep, they wake up and they're somewhere else, right? They don't know because they're limited and they're still more sophisticated than lots of other creatures and, insects and other mammals and things like that. But anyways, the Bible was reshaped and it was reshaped to make it the religion because they were competing. And they couldn't get these fucking pagans to give up their beliefs. There's a series, I think it's called The Vikings of Valhalla. Is it? Something like that on Netflix. Kind of interesting show. And, it's a battle between the Vikings who believe in their old religion and the Christians, right? There was a time that Christianity was spreading to all these European countries. And the idea was to make it the only way to get to heaven. And you were going to hell if you didn't. And to force those teachings, because that's back when the Catholic Church had an army and these, different offshoots of Christianity. They were forcefully pushing Christianity on the Irish and the Scottish and all these European countries. And, of course, the Aboriginal people in America and black people in Africa and, the Aboriginal people in Australia and these other countries, India, right? They're forcefully pushing this religion. And it's a dog shit religion. It's not very sophisticated. It's very materialistic. And the teaching of the Bible is remedial. Like the best teaching of Jesus is the kingdom of heaven is within, which is completely different than John 3:16. Because in John 3:16, the idea is that there is a throne. And Jesus is sitting next to God on the throne, and God's a king. And I've talked about this. To the people back then, trumpets and kings just sitting on thrones. I mean, a king was the ultimate, right? And so that's how this is phrased in terms of the story. But it was to reach out to simple people who lived at that time, and they didn't have the capacity to understand God as an abstract being. God is a mindless, force, like the divine essence of love. They can't understand God as that. God is an energy as opposed to God as a king. God has to be a powerful, kick-ass king sitting on a throne who's wrathful because people will, do all the things that will break the Ten Commandments otherwise, right? And so Jesus' most sophisticated teaching, his best teaching, is the kingdom of heaven is within, that the divinity is within you. And that's the starting point for spiritual life. Like in terms of the teachings of the thing that I do, the starting point is that you find divinity within you. Like that's what you begin at. And so Jesus' most sophisticated teaching is the beginning point to spiritual life. And so that has been downplayed. And so they put out this remedial stuff. And, if you've been told your whole life this is an authority, then you're going to believe whatever bullshit they're saying, right? When they, the book of Revelation. But the book of Revelation is just a part of a flawed book that has been manipulated to control people into believing that this religion is the sole authority to your afterlife. And so you waste all this time where you could be connecting to God right now and being on your spiritual journey right now and experiencing the divinity within you as the heaven within, the condition of your soul and of the etheric world, and rising up to higher and higher levels and getting closer and closer to God. as you move forward with your spiritual journey. And you are actively not worshiping or not obeying, but becoming. You're becoming what God wants you to become. God has, has a plan for you, and your soul has a plan for you in this life and in future lives. There's a long-term plan, and there is a short-term plan. It's there's whatever you're doing on a day-to-day basis, and then there's your overall soul plan to return to the source. And there's a journey, and you're not taking that journey. Like your journey has been hijacked by this bullshit, deal that you think you've gotten, where if you just accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior, and no one even knows what the fuck that really means, right? Because it's just, what does that even mean? Do you say the words? People say words all the time, right? Do you pinky swear on that? Like, do a little pinky swear? You do a little blood oath? I mean, people break their promises and renounce people, and, like 3 people of Jesus' 12 renounced him, or Judas betrayed him, Peter denied him, and Thomas doubted him, like in their moments or whatever. And Jesus himself, when he was being crucified, said, "Father, why hast thou forsaken me?" That means, why are you fucking me over, God? Like, why are you doing this to me? Why have you, like, turned your back on me, God? What did I do to you? Like, why is this happening to me? It's a moment of faith. Of course, he's being tortured, right? So you can understand why he said that, because he was doing God's work, and he was connecting to people with God, and the people turned on him and killed him and tortured him and spit on him and humiliated him, because people fucking suck, right? Some of these people were sitting there drinking the water and eating the fish, and when he turned that, whatever it was, the food, whatever that, that story is, they were hanging around Jesus, and they were digging Jesus's energy, and then they were like, oh my God, Jesus sucks, and let's turn on him, right? Like, this happens all the time. People turn on saints. And you can imagine, like, somebody who's a higher developed soul, and people know it and they experience it, and still they turn on him. I mean, why would Jesus need to be crucified? Like, what was his crime? His crime was, he was telling people that the religion that's based in the Old Testament is full of shit. That he had expanded and evolved past his religion. That the Old Testament and the Pharisees and the people running it was corrupted. It's just the same thing I'm telling you right now, right? It's the same thing. That the religion was corrupted. The Christian religion was corrupted as much as the Jewish religion was corrupted when Jesus was alive. Even more so. And so, this is for people who want more and realize that there's something else there. That there's, they want to live a spiritual life. This is the channel in terms of when I talk about things like this. There's plenty of religious channels that just preach the same bullshit everyone else is saying, about corrupted books, and the overall message is supporting the deep state of religion, right? Whatever the deep state is, of people who have manipulated Jesus' teaching the same way people have manipulated the American Constitution or the government and the people who run the system, because they are controlling you with your patriotism. They're controlling you with your religion, your belief in your religion, your faith. They're controlling you with your faith in the Constitution, the faith in your patriotic faith in the American system. And so when somebody comes along and says, I mean, this is why do you think they're demonizing the truthers? All we're saying is, these parasites, these fucking people that are running the system, are, not faithful to the system. They've manipulated the system, the Constitution, the government, and they've manipulated the religion, the Bible, and the teachings to lord over you in a way where they claim they're authority, and they're not. They're horrible people. They're using this system, the power, to control you. And when you confront that, when you speak truth to that, in the worst case, in the times of Jesus, and then throughout Christians' history, every Christian saint that came out and called bullshit on the Catholic Church or the Christian religion was fucking crucified and killed because of these people. You think God wants that? Why would God want that? You think God wanted Jesus to be killed? It wasn't part of some story that he's dying for your sins. That's some bullshit thing, right? The fact is that Jesus rose up to a higher level of spirituality, and he was imparting his teaching, partly because he went to India and he was trained in one of the forms of yoga. A lot of his teachings come from are very similar to one of the yogic movements in India. So he went and he traveled. That's where Jesus went when he was 18, and his lost years were spent in India. They don't want you to know that he went to India, which is a place where saints and people go, and they evolve spiritually. And he came back with some of these teachings because he was no longer a Jewish person. He had evolved into a spiritual person. He was no longer a person that followed a religion. He came back and he started teaching people about some of these higher teachings. The kingdom of heaven is within, and he was radiating this energy and this, his spiritual condition, and he was helping people, and they fucking turned on him, betrayed him, and killed him because people are like that. That's what people do. People don't want the higher because people don't want to change. People want to stay in their whatever, their egos, their egotistical, whatever it is. And that's just reality. I see it all the time, right? Let's say Jesus has reincarnated, because reincarnation's a real thing. But like, if you don't believe it, just, what if it's true? Your soul has multiple lives. Why would that be something that's hard to believe, right? If your soul has this life, if you have a soul, why wouldn't it have more lives? Especially when most lives are failures, right? You would agree with that. Most people live failed lives. Like, they don't, if there's a school, if there's a criteria for graduation, the majority of people don't graduate, right? The majority of people don't, don't reach whatever the goal is of human life. If there's a spiritual goal, the majority of people are just not getting there. And you can see it. They're not, like, if you look around, you're like, oh, fuck, these people are not even close. They're not even on the path. Like, most people aren't on a spiritual path. If there's a point to life, if there's a point where you're gonna, I mean, when people talk about going to heaven, there's a criteria, and the criteria is you accept Lord Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. And, that's not a definable criteria, right? Like, let's say you went to college and you didn't take any classes, and you had to accept the dean of the college or the founder of the college as your, Lord and Savior, whatever that meant, on an academic level. And they handed you a diploma and you hadn't taken any coursework, you didn't learn anything, right? Like, why would that be a criteria for graduation? Like, it's something more than that. Like, accepting somebody else as your Lord and Savior, why is that something that is going to get you into heaven or this place or that place or something on a spiritual level? Like, you have to do something to earn it, right? You have to earn heaven. Like, there's something that you would have to do to earn heaven, to earn whatever the goal of human life is. First, you have to figure out what it is. You have to understand you have a soul. You have to understand that you have, things you have to overcome in your life, obstacles and challenges and things that you have to go through in terms of having a successful life and move forward on your spiritual path, right? Like, it's very easy to understand because it exists everywhere else. Like, this is the one thing where you don't have the biggest goal. Like, your goal would be, the most important thing would be able to make it into heaven, right? If, like, that was a real thing, right? Wouldn't that be the most important thing? And it's like something as easy as just saying, even on your deathbed, I accept Jesus as my Lord and Savior. You could live a horrible life and be a mass murderer, and then right before you die, you repent and you say, Jesus, I accept you. And all you've done is be a piece of shit prick to other people and, hurt them and control them and keep them from evolving in every possible way, keeping people down, dumbing them down, all the horrible, evil shit that's being done by people, right? It's all accounted for. You don't get away with anything. So there's some kind of consequences for your actions. And you don't get like, Jesus can't die for your sins because someone else can't die for your sins. I can't die for your sins. You can't die for mine, right? We're all accountable for our own actions. So that's all bullshit. It's a bullshit deal that, you've been told as a young kid and you just believed it and you never questioned it. And so if Jesus came back and lived multiple lives, let's say Jesus was on the planet right now, how would you know? How would you find out? Like, Jesus doesn't look, the picture of Jesus as a European white guy, that's impossible. The pictures of Jesus that you see, and they're different pictures, right? Because they don't remember what he looks like. You look at the people I mean, I don't think they allow pictures of Muhammad, but in the Sajmark tradition, they had put a big statue up of Babaji, which was kind of weird because like they don't have that sort of becomes idol worship, which is not definitely a part of the Sajmark system. You're supposed to find the divinity within you. But the current master of the system, who's kind of a piece of shit, so everything he does and says is taken with a grain of salt. But I talked to my brother, my biological brother, about this, and he said that this guy calmly said that Krishna was an ugly person, like unattractive. Krishna is pictured as this big blue. Him and Rama, like Rama and Krishna, are both incarnations of Vishnu, the god, or um, the cosmic functionary of preservation, right? And that they're pictured as these blue, exalted people. And if you watch movies about them, like in Indian movies about Rama or Krishna, they're good-looking, actors, big, muscular, whatever. But he said that Krishna was an unattractive person, like he was ugly, like just whatever, and small, short, or something. And so, you know, that's not the way he's pictured now, right? Because we don't know what people look like. They don't have videos or photographs of people. And, whether they have that technology at one time or another, it's not available now. And over time, all those things get distorted. And so when they picture somebody, they're going to make them look like somebody that you would gravitate to. So if Jesus had dark skin, which he certainly did, like Jesus wasn't a blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy. Like he didn't have blue eyes, right? Like this silly. But religion is for white people. Christian religion is targeted for white people in Europe. And so when they were trying to bring in the Celtics, the Celtics, or whatever the true pronunciation is, right? The Druidic, people that did Druidism and that did paganism, and these they were these type of people. This is their whatever their religion was. They weren't going to sell them a Middle Eastern looking Jesus, right? Like Jesus could have had lighter tan skin, but he didn't have blue eyes and long hair like this picture of him. But he looks like a European, and that's who they were trying to sell this to. The Christian religion took off in Europe first, and then European countries forced it on all these other Aboriginal country people and countries around the other parts of the globe, right? Christianity took root in Europe, and then became a global situation because Europe then colonized the rest of these countries. So it wasn't that Jesus' word spread. It was that by force, the colonization of these countries forced a religion on them. I mean, fucking forced it. Like, fucking forced it, right? Beating kids. Like, kids were tortured if they reverted to their old ways and beliefs. Like, physically indoctrinating them through force in these Christian schools and killing kids at times. These grave sites. There's, part of it in one of those Yellowstone spin-off series. It features these native kids being indoctrinated by these nuns, right? And these girls being tortured and frickin' beaten when they revert to their old language and they revert to their old customs because they were being forced to be Christians, right? By the threat of death and these things. I mean, it was force. You can't use force. God doesn't use force. I mean, there's earthquakes and things like that, but that's just like there's rainstorms. There's energy and power in those rainstorms, but they're not being forced, right? You're being compelled. Get inside. It's freaking rainy out. Get inside. The sun's too hot, right? Get some shade. You're being compelled by these things, but God doesn't force you to do anything. You have the freedom of choice. That's the problem but also the potential that you might choose to do the right thing. And going back to what I was saying before, so if Jesus was black or Middle Eastern, if he looked like a typical person, look at people in that region, right? Look at the people in Israel. A lot of them are European Jews, people from Russia, but like the people who would be considered the Aboriginal people there. Some of the Jews come from the Caucasus Mountains and Russia and that area, right? Who are Caucasian, but the people who were living in the Middle East and what they look like. And if Jesus looked like that, how many European people would accept him as their Lord and Savior? Because appearance means stuff, because a lot of this stuff is superficial and physical, and it's not the quality of the soul. And so, regardless of what Jesus looked like when he was alive, let's say Jesus incarnated right now. And, he couldn't come out and say, hey, I'm Jesus, right? Like if Jesus was a person on the internet, say, right? Or whatever, celebrity or, whoever Jesus was in terms of a person. And he had still some spiritual teachings to impart to people. He couldn't come out and say, hey, I'm Jesus. Because nobody would fucking believe him. Some people might, and he might win them over by his, spiritual essence. But most people would look at him and go, no, you're not Jesus. Because like I said before, they have created their own personal Jesus. And so even though he has Jesus' soul, and let's say Jesus was more evolved, like he was better in this life, he was even more evolved than in past life, he would start saying things to you that you don't want to hear. And you would get pissed at him, and you'd probably kill him again, right? Like in one way or another. You'd crucify him in the modern way, like he'd be canceled or whatever. Because that's what people fucking do. And so the majority of Christians would turn on this person that they claim to love. They claim to love Jesus and accept him as their Lord and Savior. But if he incarnated again, and he has or will, he wasn't done. And so he'll be back if he hasn't been back already. Or if he's here already. Like there's lots of higher developed souls that are here for this particular time in this transformation or transition, possible transition of higher level of consciousness on this planet, right? And so if a person is surrendering to Jesus as their Lord and Savior, it's Jesus' soul. Like the essence. It's not what you think Jesus is. It's not the Bible. You're not surrendering to the Bible. It's just a fucking book, right? Like books are great and they can be, wonderful and they can create an essence in you, right? But, the Bible is a fictional book. Like there's things that are made up in there. A fictional recreation. The New Testament is a fictional recreation of Jesus and his life and his teachings. It's been edited and it's documented. Like it's been translated and edited. It's been changed. It's not the pure message that Jesus gave to his disciples. It's not his direct teachings and a direct account of his life. And it's different. It's seen through different lenses. It's seen through, like there's a book in the Sage-Mark system, one of the books called Tears and Laughter. And it's all these people who are Abhyasis, which is what we call ourselves, who do Sage-Mark, right? Means spiritual aspirant in Sanskrit, I think. And these Abhyasis all wrote, people how I know, of their account of their time with Babaji. These are stories about Babaji and his teachings, right? And it's kind of like it's the worst book. It's not a bad book, but it's not nearly as good as the books where it's directly the masters of the system writing or giving speeches or talking or, their stuff is of a higher level because they're on a higher level. And so, and each chapter in the book is different based on the evolution and the intimacy and the kind of relationship that people had to this guy Babaji, right? If Jesus wrote a book, it would be better than the Bible. Like it would just be a higher level book. It would be his direct teachings, not other people talking about Jesus and his teachings, right? There's a loss right there, a loss of quality, a loss of, authenticity, a loss of just from the standpoint that the disciples weren't on the same level as Jesus, so they didn't have access to the information and maybe misunderstood things or, whatever, misinterpreted things. And so there's a fall off. And then all the people who didn't know Jesus coming in and editing and saying, all right, this is what I think Jesus was like. Yeah, but did you know him? Well, no, I know him through the book. I know him through the religion. Yeah, but it's been distorted. It has been, it's not the same. There's this thing, what would Jesus do? Which I really like. That's a good thing. It's something Christians should think about, right? What would Jesus do? What would God do? What would be, a spiritual person do? What would a saint do? Whatever. Certainly for Christians, it would be, what would Jesus do? But how the fuck would you know what Jesus would do? Like, how would you know? Like, how would you fucking know what Jesus would do? You didn't know them, right? It's not what the Bible, what the your interpretation of the Bible, because each person interprets the Bible differently. Each person, and again, going back to the original comment, it's not an authority to me. So my interpretation of the Bible is, there's some good stuff in there, but you have to figure out like what was said back when Jesus was alive. What did Jesus really mean? What did they edit out? What did they edit in? What did they put in? Right? What are the changes to manipulate you to buy into your religion? Right? And these are just facts. Like I'm not making shit up. Like this has happened. The Bible's been edited, and Jesus died 2,000 years ago. And so there's stories in the Bible. So in the Mahabharata, there was a woman. So there was these two brothers, which I talked about in my last talk. One was named Pandu, who was white as a sheet, right? He had no pigmentation because his mom was, banged by this saint who was impregnated by the saint, and she turned pale when he was, when Pandu was being conceived. And the other wife, who was closed her eyes because the guy was disgusting, right? He was, came out of the, after like 100 years in the jungle, and he wasn't like, I mean, hygienic or whatever, right? And she closed her eyes because she didn't want to see the guy, and her son was blind. And so Pandu, the Pandavas were Pandu's sons, and they ended up being the heroes. And Dhritarashtra had the Kauravas, which were, and again, I'm not pronouncing these things right because it's just it's a completely different. The language is, they accent the wrong syllable. And so, or a different syllable. Their accents are different. So the words, when you read them, they're the way they would say the word is different, even though it's written in English. Because as the language, the Indian languages are quite different than the English languages. The languages that are associated with English. There's a whole different way of speaking, right? So, anyways, so the guy, the Pandu, he's out in the woods and he's hunting deer. And it's funny because their religion is very vegetarian oriented, but they were all meat eaters. The Mahabharata characters and Krishna and these people. And so Pandu's out hunting a deer, and there was a deer and they're reproducing, and he shoots the deer, he shoots the female deer, and the male deer turns into a human being, and it's a saint. And I forget that whatever it's his copula. He turned into a deer to something like this, right? But it's a human being who transformed into a deer, and he said, "Hey, what the fuck did you just shoot my female deer for? I'm cursing you, and so if you like ejaculate, you're going to die at that moment. So you can never have kids, you can never have sex, right?" A lot of curses in the Mahabharata, and like to you Christians or other people, this sounds goofy. Just like when I read the Book of Revelation, it's goofy to me, right? It's goofy. Like it sounds like to somebody who's not brought up in the religion. But anyways, Pandu marries this woman named Kunti, and Kunti, when she was 16 years old, she developed the ability to get impregnated by these divine beings, these deities. And the first one was she contacted the soul, and she's 16 years old, right? And she contacted the soul of the sun. And the soul of the sun came down and impregnated her. Like this is the Immaculate Conception story. And she gave birth to this character who would later be called Karna, who I believe I was in a past life. I have some association with this character. This character gets kind of screwed over throughout the story. And he ends up having to fight his brothers because he ends up on the other side of the war, right? And he's kind of the better warrior, but he's being undermined by the powers that be. And she's a 16-year-old girl who's not married, so she can't have a baby. So she disguises her, she hides out, and she has the baby, and she puts the baby in a basket and sends it down the river. And this is part of the story of Moses, right? Like this was long before these stories were taken in the Christian religion. The Immaculate Conception of the five Pandavas, and the story of Karna being put in a basket and going down the river like Moses was put in a basket, right? So the story originated in India. And so these stories that are now associated with Christian teachings, and there's other stories, like people talk about how has very, the ISIS story has a lot of similarities with Jesus. Is it ISIS? I'm pretty sure it's ISIS. But there's this Egyptian, story of a divine being who has all these, similarities to what was later the Christian story, because they took a bunch of this stuff and folded it into the story of Jesus in the Bible. They took from various places. They took the idea of the soul from India, and they took some of these other spiritual stories and myths and things, and they put them into the Bible. That happened. Like it is going to be documented. It's not Isis. Isis was a woman. I don't know what I'm talking about. It's Horus. Horus was Isis's son. Okay, so story written down 5,000 years ago of Horus versus story written down about Jesus. And so it says here, let me make this a little bit bigger because I can't see it. It says, born of the Virgin Mary, born of the Virgin Isis. So Isis was a virgin. Birthday is celebrated on 25th December. Birthday celebrated on 25th December. I don't know if this is true. This is a meme that went around. Northern Star led wise men to him when he was born. Eastern Star led 3 wise men to him when he was born. Horus. Taken to Egypt to escape the wrath of Herod. Taken to Egypt to escape the wrath of Typhon. Taught in the temple as a child. Taught in the temple as a child. Baptized by John the Baptist. Baptized by Anup the baptizer at age 30. Both of them are age 30. Had 12 disciples. Had 12 disciples. Performed miracles and walked on water. Performed miracles and walked on water. Raised Lazarus from the dead. Raised Karza from the dead. He was transfigured. He was transfigured on a mount. Was transfigured on the mount. And so the included the way titles, or I'm not sure what that word says, so let me make it bigger again. Says here at the end here, titles included the way, the truth, and the light, the Messiah is God, Son of Man, all these things, right? These crucified and buried in a tomb and resurrected, both of them. And so, and I don't know the story of Horus. This is just some meme that went around. But these stories were clearly folded into some of these, these other stories. The idea of a soul, the Atman, that came from India years and years ago. Wasn't discovered in Judaism. It was something that was plagiarized, right? And not giving credit to where you found that out. Somebody discovered that, some person figured out that we had a soul. There's a point where human beings didn't know that we had a soul. And then we did. Like animals don't know they have a soul. So just to wrap up the Pandava story, so this woman married Pandu, Kunti, and she gave Pandu 3 sons of different deities because he couldn't have sex. And then he married a second wife, and she wanted to have kids, so Kunti taught her how to do that. She had 2 sons, and those were the 5 Pandavas. And then Pandu and his wife, she was like just, she needed, his second wife, his younger wife, needed to be, she was feeling sexual or whatever, horny or whatever it is. And and he submitted to her, and he died. Like, that's how he died. Like, he was cursed that way, and he died. A lot of curses in the Mahabharata. But you understand this, that these stories and all these things, that you have to be taken with a grain of salt, because they're thousands of years old, right? And they're going to be distorted over time. And the distortion's always going to be to magnify and glorify the religious figure. They're going to take out the humanity, the human part of the person, what makes them human, and they're going to put in things that make them more divine and less like you, less like what kind of person you are. And so if you were around somebody like this and you saw the divinity in them, you also had to balance that out with their human characteristics and their human flaws. And that's a real problem. It was a problem in the Sajmark system. And so in the Sajmark system, and this is an Indian tradition, and it really was supposed to be this way in the Catholic Church, the idea of the Pope. We just watched that movie, The Conclave. And, it's about choosing a Pope. And of course, it's all political now, and it's just all icky and all the stuff with the abuse of kids. I mean, just it's, the cardinals and the bishops and the cover up and all the bullshit of this religion. But the idea was that Peter, had Jesus's, he was Jesus's successor, and he had this condition of the Christ, that was the ideal. But in the Sajmark tradition, the transmission that's given, like we sit and, you sit in front of somebody, you're facing somebody, a preceptor, or you're the preceptor, and a transmission's given in a cleaning of the heart. And these are these sittings that connect you to divinity. And you meditate on the divine essence of love in your heart, right? Divine light in your heart. While you're meditating, this work is being done. And then collectively we sit in group meditation where a preceptor or the master of the system transmits. And the transmission of this divine energy from the place where the master of the system is, what's called the central region, which is a new discovery and a new achievement that is a part of this system. And, again, this sounds like gobbledygook to all you guys. I don't give a shit if you believe it or not, because it's an unproven belief, right? Just like, I read Whispers of the Brighter World prophecies, and to me they mean something because I trust the book and I trust the system, because I've tested the system and it's worked out for me, right? But for you, it doesn't mean shit, and I totally accept that. I'm not, I just put it out there because I have information to share. You might trust me, but you don't trust the book, right? You might think that I'm a person that makes good decisions, and that I'm a person worth listening to, and I have, some influence over you. You believe in me, but you don't believe in the book, and you haven't tried the system. You had ever met the masters. So you're like, yeah, I might be good because I trust Paul, and, whatever, to whatever extent you trust me. I mean, you shouldn't trust anybody, but you shouldn't not trust anybody either. It's just this idea that, people will screw you over, but sometimes people will do you right. It's like, we all experience that. It's just, it's both things, right? But anyways, in the Sajmark tradition, there was this master named Lalaji, and then he I don't know what the word is. I know what the word is, I just can't remember it. Well, he died, and 13 years later, he was intercommuning with his successor. They both had the same name, Ramchandra, and the guy is called Babaji, the second master. And Lalaji merged with him. His soul then was just with Babaji all the time. There was his essence was merged into Babaji. Babaji had his own individual soul, but Lalaji's achievements and his spiritual essence merged into his disciple, which is a big thing in the Indian tradition. But he did it through this transmission, not through, just the idea it happened. And the Catholic Church wishes the Pope still retain Jesus's essence, right? But that's long since, it doesn't exist here in the religion itself. Jesus has, left the building in a sense, right? And then Babaji had this disciple, Master Charji. Charji was his, the guy who was running the organization for him. And Charji was the guy I knew. And they were traveling together in Copenhagen in the airport in Denmark. And Babaji gave him a 1 minute and 40-second sitting, which is short. They're usually a half hour. And his essence merged into Charji. And 90% of the people said that didn't fucking happen, right? Because they didn't like Charji, or they liked Charji, but they didn't think of him as being as evolved as Babaji, and they didn't accept him. And so, either Babaji's essence was there or it wasn't. Do you understand? Either Babaji was a divine, person who elevated to a high level of spirituality, and these people experienced it, and they loved Babaji, and they loved his transmission. They loved all of it. They thought Babaji was great. And Charji traveled around with Babaji, and Babaji said, he was his, they would travel to Europe and these other places, and in all these countries, all these different places in India. And Babaji was saying, he wrote this thing on this piece of paper saying that that Charji was his successor. But Babaji's kids wanted the properties, so they said, "Fuck you, we don't believe that," right? And they tried to kill him and poison him. And there was lawsuits and shit that went on for years. And this was the people knew Charji, and Charji was running everything. Charji was running the organization, and he was Babaji's like sort of. He was like a bouncer. He would protect Babaji when people would be, he'd create boundaries and things, and he was just there. And people, like didn't accept him. And even though the essence was the same, clearly the essence was the same. And so then Charji died, and he left this guy Kamish Patel, and there was no talk about a sitting. And Kamish Patel almost immediately started talking shit about Charji, which is like not heard of in India, like just dissing your guru. He tried to cancel his birthday celebration for years. He's undermined Charji, saying he wasn't a master. He left him off a list of people who are part of this so-called divine hierarchy of the system. And everyone wanted to accept Daji, Kamlesh, because they didn't want to do Kamlesh like people had done Charji. And Charji said, you guys have to do a good job accepting my successor. But his successor turned out to be a piece of shit, right? And clearly isn't connected to Charji and really, the rest of the mission. He scrubbed all the other literature and, these books and things. And then he's writing his own shitty little books. And he sucks, like he just sucks. And so the essence is not there. Like the essence, everyone wanted the essence to be there. The essence of the previous masters, right? And so, this idea that the essence of Jesus is in the Pope, no one believes that shit. That isn't a Catholic, right? Like the essence of Jesus could be within you if you connect to it, right? If you connect to, there would be a higher level of commitment to your connection with Jesus. But, only the true believers of Jesus would be able to see him in any form. And let's say he incarnated and he wasn't a Christian, he was more evolved and he was doing something else. You wouldn't accept him. He wouldn't look like the Jesus that he wouldn't look the way Jesus you think Jesus is. And this is what I was saying to people way back when, right? Go ahead and connect to Jesus, connect to the higher souls. It's love Jesus for Jesus. But the intermediary, the creation of the Bible and these things, and again, this is for spiritual people. If you're doing the religion, then you have to buy into all the bullshit. But the bullshit's going to kill you in the end. It's going to suffocate your ability to evolve spiritually because it's not true. Like the system, the Bible is filled with inaccuracies and plagiarized stories and, people's interpretations of things. It's been manipulated and translated and changed by people who are not spiritual, who are power-hungry people. And, it's created this religion that's a powerful organization on the material world, but it's a middleman between you and preventing you from connecting to the divinity within you. All these religions are, right? That's why, Swami Vivekananda said, religion is a great thing to be born into, but a horrible thing to die in. Because when you're a kid, a religion's good. It teaches the basic ethics and things, gives you a sense of God. But then as you get older, you have the ability to connect to God directly and have a spiritual path, and that's a higher level movement. And that's what I offer here in terms of my understanding of things, right? That there is something that's better than religion. It's higher than religion. And those people who can only do religion, there's plenty of shit for you out there, right? That's why I say, this is for people who aspire for something more. Like something, is missing in their life, and religion doesn't satisfy that need. And there's the Sajmarg meditation that helps people. Now we do the Gratefullness meditation. There's links in the description box of all my videos, and you can experience the transmission, the cleaning, and it's not as good as it used to be because the organization is fucked now, and whatever. But the essence still lives on. But when the essence isn't here, the transmission won't flow, and that'll be a sad day for me and the people who love the system. But it's just another opportunity that people didn't gravitate to, because people always want the lower. People always gravitate to the lower. I mean, not always, but 99% of the time. And the few people that gravitate to the higher, they often get pulled back down to the lower, because whatever's gone wrong with the human beings, we have a predisposition to go to the lower end of things, and it's sad, and it could be the ruin of our species, and we'll see what happens. Anyways, I'm starting to fade out here. Let's get into the other stuff. Okay, so I want to add something to. I'm in the middle of where I'm talking about Ryan Clark and Aaron Rodgers. I'm about to wrap that part up. But I went on a walk with my dogs, and I thought this was an important thing to add to what I was saying earlier. There's experiences I've had of people I know that I knew from a past life. And, there's people who are very conscious of it, and there are people that, yeah, that makes sense. And, Master Chargy had said you can't have a conversation of more than 3 minutes with somebody if you haven't had a past life with them, which I thought was interesting. Again, that's not like that's something that's, that he said that other people reported he said, but that, kind of, I feel like there's that element. There's people you just can't connect with. And then there's people that you have some kind of connection with. And I would assume the people who listen to my channel here, we've had some sort of past association with. And it might not be here on planet Earth, it could be somewhere else. And that's the other thing. But then there are people who are really significant to your life, right? And when my wife and I got together, it was like we'd known each other forever. And, we were together like a short period of time. And it seemed like we had been married for a long period of time. Like it just, fit together in these things, right? And so, like, she's probably one of the premier examples, but then everybody to do with the Sajmark system. And so I've had these experiences where, like, I recognize somebody, and I don't know who they were to me and what our relationship was in the past, but there's something there, right? There's a group of people, saints, higher developed souls, that all have risen to a higher level. And then there's people who are associated with Jesus directly in past lives. And, those people who claim to love Jesus, you would love Jesus' soul. And you would be able to find him in this life if he was, if he existed, which I believe that he either has or will be in the near future. And he's existed since, it's 2,000 years, and he wasn't done. Like, he wasn't done in heaven, like this whole thing. That's all just bullshit that they made up, which I talked about earlier, right? The religious people, the bean counters and the gatekeepers made that shit up so that they could profit from the religion. And so, Jesus and people who are like Jesus, who are on this higher developed plane paths, and, most Christians can't recognize those people. Some of them can. And I don't mean just Christians. I don't mean to single out Christians. It's not just religious people. It's also spiritual people who couldn't adjust from Babaji to Chargy and my thing. And there are people in a spiritual practice, and, Babaji said, this is my successor. And they're like, no, fuck that. I don't like that guy. And then, the whole debacle with Daji. And so, like, it's just, it's sad in a way that people can't gravitate towards the higher nature, and the connection they have with somebody on a soul level, on a material level, doesn't manifest onto a soul level, right? And so the problem that most Christians have, or most Muslims or Hindus or any religion, is that they have an idea that's been constructed by other people, and then they put their own personal spin on it, their own personal Jesus. And it's not what Jesus really is. You're not connecting to the real Jesus, which I would encourage. And, if you're a Christian, then the highest level of Christianity is directly connect to Jesus, bypass the structure and the religion, and then connect with them and see, ask honest questions. Like, you could have dialogues, and you'll find a way to communicate. If you're able to really connect with Jesus, you might be somebody else, some other, that's a problem with that kind of communication. But, pray to God to connect you to Jesus, pray in a way that's, innocent, wholesome, and with confidence and faith. And then ask him questions, and then ask what you should do, and, be guided from that perspective, right? Like, I don't recommend things, but to me, that's the highest level of Christianity. If you're going to love Jesus as a soul. At best, the Bible would be, a sort of a, an incomplete copy of Jesus's thoughts and who he was, and the memories, and who he was through the memories of other people. It's not who Jesus was as a soul. Jesus' soul isn't encapsulated in the Bible. It's his essence isn't there, and so his essence is somewhere, and we have access to it on an etheric level. And so whatever one does, that's the way to really intercommune or be with people. That's the term satsang, in the Sanskrit word, which means to be with the higher developed soul and meditate together in a place where you're going on to the divine level of things, right? To the higher level. And people paying attention to their higher nature. And for that I think is just essential to everybody, and it's what I was talking about here. Because people, think that they're connected to something, but when it comes down to it, they're connected to something that exists inside themselves. Like you have an internalized idea of Jesus and God, and it's on an ego level. It's a mental level. But then there's something you can feel on a soul level when the love that you feel for other people. The difference between like listing the things that you like, the qualities and characteristics and the ideas and the good things that are that are there in your significant other people, and the things you don't like about them. But then also there's going deeper to what their soul is and being around their soul, and that is to penetrate to a deeper level of things. And when there's true love there, whatever the capacity of that love, love of your family, love of your spouse, love of God, love of art, whatever your profession, if you really dive deep into that, there's that's the truth of the love exposes the truth and the essence of the other people, of who they are on a soul level. Anyways, let's get into the other stuff here. Okay, so I have a bunch of stuff to get to today. I want to start off with this. It's a continuation of what I covered with Stephen A. Smith and Aaron Rodgers on the Pat McAfee show, and he said this.
I know I got to say this multiple times for people because they don't listen, but say whatever the fuck you want about me. I don't care. But just before you do it, whether you state your name, your accolades, pronouns, whatever it is, just state your vax status so that anything you say afterwards gets put in the right light. Just get it out there. Because then when you say things about me, people can at least be like, oh, you are captured by the multi-billion-dollar propaganda psyop, and you're still upset about it.
Okay.
This will help things out.
Yeah, this is good. This will settle it all down. I appreciate that. And
hey, you know what I mean? Just put that in just so everybody knows where you're coming from. Everybody knows, okay, cool. You're twice vaxxed Moderna with 3 booster shots. And then boom, boom, boom. Say what you want to say. Whatever. I don't care.
This is similar to what I said about all the media personnel should have a big, like some animated dildo right near their mouth with Pfizer or Big Pharma written on it, right? Because, and that's just graphic, not unnecessary. But, it's just the fact that these people all work for these companies. Anybody working for ESPN, Disney, for example, Stephen A. Smith, First Take, it's what I said about Kyrie Irving, that they have a financial relationship with Pfizer and Moderna and these other companies, right? YouTube, anybody that Pfizer runs ads on, they're going to cater to the people that are paying them. And that's what Big Pharma does. That's what so many businesses do, right? It's good business. That you don't want the media talking shit about you, so you advertise with them. Like everyone knows that's a thing, right? That if you advertise with you support a personality, that person should, maybe a less graphic idea would be that people wear instead of wearing suits, or if they have suits, they should have patches on their suits with the corporations that sponsor them or sponsor their networks, kind of like they do with NASCAR, where on the car you've got all these different companies advertising right on your lapel, right on the car, right on your shirt, or whatever it is, right? See, the rest of us on social media, all of us on social media, the majority of us don't have sponsors. The bigger the channel, the bigger the platform, there's sponsorship, right? And when you have sponsors, and if your sponsors were Big Pharma, for example, you would know that that person was not going to, they had been paid for, bought and sold to whatever extent, to not criticize Big Pharma. If somebody wanted to advertise with me, and again, that's not likely, and I'm not going to do it, but, if somebody wanted to, they would be paying me money, and I would be telling you how good their shit is, right? So I'd have to believe in what they're doing. And, I don't like to do that anyway. Like I've talked about that so much. I'm not a person who likes to, I say what works for me. Like anything that I say works for me, I have no financial relationship with at all. It's just stuff that has worked for me, but I don't know if it's going to work for you. And I always say that, right? Because people have different constitutions, different, spiritual paths, all these things. And so even to the extent of the Sajmark meditation, which I think is the greatest thing ever, it's not for everybody, at least in terms of, people will benefit from it, but probably won't enjoy it or won't know that they're benefiting from it, right? So why would they do it, right? If it's not something that they can perceive having some benefit for them, why would they ever do it, right? So, it's for each person to experience and have their own choices, their own research, their own path. But in all that, when somebody does have a sponsor, they're sponsored because the person has to sell you their stuff themselves, or they're running commercials that they're running, right? And usually it's the person who's the podcaster, the person telling you what they advertising, reading the promotion. You see this a lot with sports gambling. You see these athletes who have podcasts now often have sports gambling as their sponsor, right? But in terms of the people who work at ESPN and CNN, they're not selling you things directly in terms of they're not shilling for Big Pharma or any of these companies that run ads on CNN. And yet they have influence over them. RFK Jr. said that he had a piece that was going to run on Fox, and Roger Ailes said his bosses said that if he ran it, he'd be fired because Big Pharma would pull their ads, right? And we know that because what happened with YouTube in the ad apocalypse, there was some controversial video that was made in Europe, England, a shitty little video, kind of a truther video. And McDonald's or somebody ran an ad on it, and people complained to McDonald's, why are you supporting this person's point of view? And so all these companies said that all these companies pulled their advertisement from YouTube until they started to oversee what was being said on their platform. That was the beginning of the end of YouTube as a place where you could just go say whatever you wanted to say, right? And then they came in with all these bullshit rules. It was all staged. It was called the ad apocalypse. It factored in more than just truthers. It was everybody. But either way, they exerted their influence over these platforms, the advertisers. We know that. Disney and these other people were pulling their ads from Elon Musk's run Twitter, now X, because of his views in these things, putting financial pressure, using financial weapons as a way to silence people and not say things that go against the powers that be, right? There's a whole RFK Jr. thing I want to cover in a bit because that's become the new focal point. And so what Aaron Rodgers is saying that people should put their vax status, I think more importantly, they should put who pays their bills. Like they should have some, sense of when there's a topic, like this is what's called conflict of interest, where you're looking for someone to tell you the truth, but they're shilling for a company. And Aaron Rodgers is saying this based on the fact that he didn't come out and say he didn't get it. He said he got immunized by using some homeopathic remedies, and also the fact that he had COVID. It came out, that people thought he was lying about not getting vaxxed, and they just tried to destroy him in the media, right? Like almost as bad as what they did to Kyrie Irving. But if these people were honest about where their opinions were coming from, their bosses would say, this is what we need you to say. And so once your bosses are handling you, then you're a piece of shit because your views are no longer yours. Your views are influenced by, you can't speak truth if the truth is being told to you. You can't even speak your truth because your truth is you want to make more money at ESPN. So Aaron Rodgers is calling bullshit. And it started before that. So Aaron Rodgers said things about people in the media, and I'll show you that clip in a bit. And then this guy here. So Aaron Rodgers came on and said that these guys who were criticizing him were players who weren't as good or players who still want to be relevant. And, what ESPN used to be about highlights and, sports stuff is now about these pundits and now they're the stars, and they want to be stars, they want to be relevant, they want to have attention, and so they have to have these hot takes, right? Which I talked about with QBs. This is what happened with the truth community when the QBs came on, and they would just make up the most, bullshit like stories they could, and they wouldn't fact check anything, and they just roll them out and pretend it was true, and the QBs would, go to it because they're already being lied to by the government that was creating this psychological operation called QAnon, right? And so you had all these dopes coming in, and they were just posting or watching videos that were, just clearly not true or based in any kind of a factual type situation. Because hot takes are everything. And people just want to be distracted, and so they don't care if it's true or not. They just want the energy that comes from something controversial. Plus, these guys were highly critical of players. And these are former players who are saying things not because they necessarily mean them or believe them, but because, A, they're hot takes that are going to get clicks, they're going to get people to watch it, and B, their sponsors are, influencing, and ABC Disney is influencing what they say, right? And so, so Ryan Clark says, well, you're doing the same thing by going on Pat McAfee. But Aaron Rodgers isn't, because he isn't throwing anybody under the bus. Like, he talks shit about people who had criticized him, mostly about the immunization thing, right? And so, the whole thing is completely different, because what he does on Pat McAfee is express his, views on football and these things. And then when he went through that controversy, he talked about that. But he doesn't throw any of these people under the bus. So he criticized these people who are, basically shills for ESPN Disney, and they're under these contracts. And they also have the pressure of having to say things that are going to go viral. They have to have hot takes, right? And so both of those things are true. And so these guys didn't like that, because they know that they're not giving their true opinions. And so he, instead of owning up to that, he calls Aaron Rodgers a fraud.
Are people not supposed to be able to do their jobs and do their jobs in an unbiased way and be honest about who you are?
You're not unbiased. See, you're not unbiased because, number one, you're pressured to come up with something controversial, even if it's just goofy. And a lot of things are just imagination, they're not real. Trade scenarios and shit that are never going to happen. They just talk shit all the time that are just, imaginative. And then some of the things are hurtful, in terms of them slamming people. I don't care about that. Words are words, right? They don't mean anything. And these opinions don't mean anything. But it's slanderous and, questioning people's integrity and character or whatever it might be, which they did with Aaron Rodgers and Kyrie Irving. And, this guy's particularly bad at it because he goes after people in a way that, he's doing it for his contract, right, to make money in ESPN. And then there's the shilling for the ESPN sponsors. Being told what you can say about certain subjects, and, the stuff to do with Big Pharma is a part of that. So he says that he's getting paid to do the exact same thing on the Pat McAfee show, which it isn't. If you watch Aaron Rodgers on Pat McAfee and you watch these guys on First Take, it's entirely different, right? He isn't, slandering people. He isn't talking about people's character of other players and things like this. He isn't going in and saying, oh, this guy sucks and he's a failure and, the stuff that they do on a regular basis. If you win, you're the greatest person. Giannis Antetokounmpo said this. I'll show you his clip in a second, which speaks to all this, right? It's whatever happened, you win and you lose. Nobody's undefeated, right? Sometimes you have that occasionally with boxers or something like that, limited type of, whatever, professional career, but they've gotten their ass kicked before, right? It's not, whatever they've become later on, but you grow up and there's defeats that happen, right? And everybody has their moments of failure. Everyone comes up small at some point. And it's just, whatever, the losers are demonized and the winners are, pat on the back briefly. And that's what they do on these shows, right? Which is, another added distraction and, the whole thing now with gambling and the rest of that stuff. And so what he does here is completely different what Aaron Rodgers does on Pat McAfee. And it's dishonest and it's disingenuous to imply it's the same thing.
This dude is once again tone deaf. This dude is once again unaware. This dude is once again arrogant to a point that's almost sickening. Because
he's making, Aaron Rodgers was making fun of this thing right here.
he says these things and he talks tough and he behaves in this way, but he ain't.
But he ain't tough.
Right? He has all of this cachet because he's a good player.
Look at Cam Newton laughing.
But they ain't people around here that come around and talk about what type of leader you are. They ain't people that come around here and talk about wanting to follow you because of the type of man you have been.
Well, that's quite different because actually he stood up and was authentic. And he wasn't paid for by Pfizer, which is a higher level thing, right?
This dude is a fraud.
So that's the thing. He calls him a fraud, right? But what Aaron Rodgers said about you is completely true. And what you're saying about him isn't. Like you're comparing what you do here to what he does in Pat McAfee. That's not accurate. And you're saying that he, that he's a fraud because he's doing the same thing that you're doing. And he's a poor leader and these things. He's not saying anything about you. He didn't say anything about any of you guys. He didn't call you poor leaders. He said that you guys come in, you want to be celebrities, and you were mediocre players, a lot of them, right? Good to mediocre, but either way, your time is done, your career's over, and you want to have the spotlight, and you want to make a lot of money. And to do that, you got to make up, salacious shit, and you got to shill for the sponsors that are, whatever it is, right? And so, what he said was true, and what you're saying isn't. And that's because you can't say what's true because you're being sponsored by Pfizer or whatever it is, right? And you're, the pressure that's there to put something out that people are going to want to click on, which is a big part of like the whole problem with the internet, where people will make things worse and bigger and, the whole thing, right? I mean, people would say, all right, that would say to me, your title is clickbait, which is, I mean, I have to make up a title. I don't do clickbait stuff. But people would accuse me of that. And I'm like, well, you clicked on it, right? Because it's your fault. Like, it's the viewer's fault that, it's the viewer's fault that people are watching Stephen A. Smith and Ryan Clark. Because they want bullshit, right? People want bullshit. They want just things that aren't true that entertain them. They want things that are explosive. They want, takes that are, whatever they are, opinionated, that are fantastical. They want something that's not based in reality. That's why the QB thing took off, right? If I made a video on Tom Hanks that was, thoughtful and factual and, whatever it was more reality based, and the QBs would make a video on Tom Hanks about some crazy shit that isn't true and him being locked up at Guantanamo Bay, right? Some bullshit stuff like that. Then, people are going to watch the QB one because it's more salacious. It's more, but it's fake. There's nothing in it. It's fraudulent, right? And so your whole thing is your model, the model of these talk shows is fraudulent because most of the stuff they say isn't true or isn't going to happen, and it's just whatever, controversial thing they can cook up that day, and it's based in, their sponsors, and now gambling's a part of it, right? Where gambling is a big part of it. It also influences people's decision on who to bet on and these other things, right? So that's, so it's. I mean, it was things that used to be illegal and a certain or immoral have crept in and made sports even like greasier than it was before. So Ryan Clark then responded, because Aaron Rodgers, the thing I showed you first, came after it. Ryan Clark called him a fraud. So Aaron Rodgers said the stuff about how Aaron Rodgers said the stuff he said about these new media hosts. And then these guys went in on him because that's what they do, right? Because it's, again, this is to drive ratings. And it's good for business. Like, it's good for people to be interested in. They love beefs. Beefs, these rap beefs are fake, whatever, right? And so then Aaron Rodgers said the thing about the vax status. And so this was his response to that.
Wanted to make sure all your people knew it was me. Here is why I called Aaron Rodgers, or why I called you a hypocrite. Because you're actually on ESPN talking about my fellow colleagues and the people I work with, saying that now, because they are former players and weren't as great as players of you as you were, you feel like, or they feel like they're the stars. And that's not it. TV has changed. It's more about opinion and the informed opinion of people who have played the game. What's hypocritical about
No, what he was ascribing was your motivation, right? So people like attention. Like this is, there's some people who want to be in front of the camera, right? And that's all the people who are in this kind of media. All these guys have podcasts now, and they want to verbalize what they have to say. And there's so many sports podcasts, and then there's the stuff that happens that's officially sponsored on ESPN and these other places. And, it's a good way to make a living. And so some of it's monetary based, it's in terms of your, whatever you're doing, right? Why people want to be in the media, this kind of media. One of it is to make money giving your thoughts, right? Being able to express your thoughts, which people like to do, and being seen and heard by other people, right? But in the case of someone like this, it's being a star. I don't know if they cut off the beginning. We'll see if I'm going to let it run, and I'll go back and show you the beginning. But he starts off by talking about his successes.
what you said is you said it while on TV with Pat McAfee, who has done an amazing job with this platform. And even though he was an all-pro punter, he's now extremely famous and more well-known for what he does in his post-career. Even more hypocritical of you is that you're sitting across from three people who have never played the game. And they are also entitled to talk about football in a very informed way because...
See, what he was talking about wasn't whether people were talking about football or not. What he was talking about was you guys going in and basically calling people losers or frauds or hypocrites and, challenging their characters because of views and clicks and being opinionated about the kind of people are based on their decisions. And it started with him because of him. Again, he didn't ask for it. He said to people, they asked him, what's your status? And he didn't want to take, he didn't want the heat and the distraction of telling people that he took homeopathics instead of the vax, right? And so, which makes sense. Like, why wouldn't he do that? I mean, it's better to come out and say these things, but Kyrie Irving was an example of this. I don't know what Ryan Clark said about Kyrie Irving. I'm not sure. He doesn't cover basketball. But Stephen A. Smith and these other guys, were destroying Kyrie Irving as a person, and Kyrie Irving was a hero for what he was doing, even more so than Aaron Rodgers, because Aaron Rodgers wasn't willing to take on the fight. He just wanted to play football and just, not have to get the vax. But it came out because he couldn't play in a game. It was clear that he didn't have the vax. And so they descended on him. They started criticizing him. We all saw that. Everyone saw that. And so that's what he's referring to. Like, if you guys are criticizing him and you guys are working for Walt Disney, ESPN Disney, and everyone who worked there had to mandatorily get it. And, there was like that part of it. And has to shill for Pfizer. You guys can't criticize Pfizer. If you did, you'd be fired. If you said what Aaron Rodgers said or Kyrie Irving, you'd be fired. And so your opinion is based in you wanting to keep your job. It's that simple. Stephen A. Smith said it. He didn't want to give up his $8 million. I covered this on an earlier video. And so what he said was 100% accurate, was that you guys have to say these salacious things about people. One, because you're sponsored by Pfizer, and two, because you're needing these clicks and views and things, and you want to be a star. Like, why do you want to do it? Why you want it's one thing to have a platform, but for you to pop, you have to say things that, are outside the normal boring shit that people might say, right?
Because if we've learned anything from Mina Kimes, you don't actually have to step on the field to be excellent at the job of analyzing football.
But you're not analyzing football. It's one thing to talk about the plays and mistakes and failures, why the losers, why they're losers, and the winner, why they're winners. But then they get into people's characters and who they are as human beings. And you guys shit on people all the time. He's one of the worst people to do that. Saying horrible things about current players. And they don't dig it. Like they're not into it because they look at you as being part of a fraternity and you're violating that so you can be famous. That's what Aaron Rodgers said. And he's not doing the same thing because his fame or interests come from his standing up for things that he believes in, right? Or having controversial, things that he's into, like ayahuasca or whatever those things are, right? Like his, something different. Like he's got a Netflix special because he's a different type of person.
I spoke to that hypocrisy because you were getting paid to do that, which Pat said you deserve to. And that is why you received the money that you did, at least initially, because of what you brought to his platform. Now, let me be clear, because I know you want us to list these things. My name is Ryan Clark.
So this is the part, right?
Played 13 years in the NFL, been to 2 Super Bowls. I have as many rings as you do. I was the captain of 2 separate football teams. I'm also an Emmy winner. I'm also the co-host, owner, and partner of an Emmy-nominated podcast called
He also has his initials on his clothes.
The Pivot. Now, I know something else you were very interested in was my vaccination status.
That was the only thing. He didn't care about your credentials, right? Like that's, it's the vaccination status for the very reason. Like he didn't ask for your credentials. This is you saying all the things that you're good at. But like, you were part of you played for the Pittsburgh Steelers and they won a Super Bowl while he was on the team. He was a starting safety or, cornerback, right? And so, he was a good player, because he had a good career. But that's not important. It's about you demonizing other players now. That's what he was saying. Like you're not getting what his points were. And then the stuff about where this comes from, you guys descended in on him and Kyrie Irving because ESPN is a shill for pharma, big pharma. It's that simple. Like you can't deny it because ESPN made it mandatory that everyone had to be vaccinated.
And yes, I'm vaxxed because I have no spleen, I have no gallbladder.
Okay, so that sucks, right? Because he lost those things playing football. But those aren't, that's not what the vax doesn't support those things. I mean, your gallbladder is, that's important to your health. And your spleen is your extra blood supply. So he's missing internal organs for playing football. But, that's not somebody, you're vaxxed because you wouldn't be able to work at ESPN if you weren't. Regardless of if you didn't want to take it and you did research, and what if that actually hurt those areas? What if what if there's side effects or something? Like, you don't know. Like, did you do any sort of research? Like, that's almost like victim conscious. Look, I'm hurt because I played football. I'm missing these internal organs, so I had to get it. Well, those things aren't, necessarily true. Like, is there any studies that you looked at, and there's any research that you saw that having a gallbladder and a spleen was you need to get this thing, right, put in your body? It's probably, maybe it could have made it worse. What are the side effects, right? But either way, you didn't have a choice because you want to be on ESPN. So that's what Aaron Rodgers was saying. If you're on ESPN, you can't criticize it, or you can't look into it. What if you looked into it and you had the same opinion Aaron Rodgers? Or what if someone that got hurt or was injured? Or what about, the Buffalo Bills player that, had cardiac arrest, right? Hamlin, Damar Hamlin. And so what about all those things?
Because of playing in Denver and being willing to go back, honestly, and play again. Because I've been in those locker rooms. And I've talked to people that have been in the locker rooms with you. I have the stories. I have all the things that they said that informed my opinion of who you are. And as far as your vaccination status, so you can stop trying to trick people into thinking that we want to talk about that above the stink of your film, I've never heard it one more time after your incident. And the only reason we spoke about it then was because based on your vaccination status, it was going to determine how long you were out. And also,
that's not what you did. You guys demonized the crap out of him. Like, you're lying about it. Are you saying that it was because he was out because he missed a game that, or whatever it was, because they wouldn't allow him to play? And then he was demonized regularly by everybody, including this guy and Stephen A. Smith. And they all set in on him, and the media did in general. We all know what happened there. That's why he was on Pat McAfee, and this Pat McAfee show blew up, because everyone wanted to hear what Aaron Rodgers had to say about it. And Aaron Rodgers gave thoughtful responses, which you guys didn't respond to. And now, he's been put into this category of the Kyrie Irving category. And no one ever says these guys were right all along because, in reality, even Bill Gates has said that
in beating COVID-19?
Well, sadly, the virus itself, particularly the variant called Omicron, is a type of vaccine. That is, it creates both B-cell and T-cell immunity, and it's done a better job of getting out to the world population than we have with vaccines.
So what Bill Gates said there, and this was said by other people, is that natural immunity won out, that the virus mutated and got out to everybody, and eventually that led to herd immunity through, natural immunity, right? So what Aaron Rodgers did ended up being the solution. Remember, I'm saying that because they said that everyone who didn't get vaccinated was a threat. I mean, let's get into it. Let me show you that meme here. Let me show the demonization of the people of the anti-vaxxers, because this is just partial. We know what was said. Anybody who didn't get vaccinated was considered a bad citizen, and like a typhoid Mary carrying this virus and dangerous to everybody. And that was incentivized by these people all being a part of a beast, the beastly system that's supported by big pharma's advertising everywhere. And also on Fox Sports, where Terry Bradshaw basically calls Aaron Rodgers a lying piece of shit, right?
It's science, and you shut up and wear your mask. It's science, and you shut up and wear your mask. It's science, and you shut up and wear your mask.
You shouldn't cut anti-vax people out of your life. They could be dead tomorrow. Spend time with them, call them, get in the will.
Screw your freedom.
The latest data that confirms that we're still in a pandemic of the unvaccinated. Continue to be among the unvaccinated, are among the unvaccinated, are unvaccinated. The unvaccinated, there are people who are dying and who will die who didn't have to. If you haven't gotten vaccinated, do it now. Do it now. It could save your life, and it could save the lives of those you love. This is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. The unvaccinated overcrowd our hospitals, are overrunning emergency rooms and intensive care units, leaving no room for someone with a heart attack or pancreatitis or cancer. This is not about freedom or personal choice. It's about protecting yourself and those around you, the people you work with, the people you care about, the people you love. My job as president is to protect all Americans. My message to unvaccinated Americans is this: we've been patient, but our patience is wearing thin, and your refusal has cost all of us. As I speak to you, millions of Americans are still unvaccinated and unprotected. And because of that, their communities are at risk, their friends are at risk, the people that they care about are at risk. But if you're unvaccinated, you're not. And you're putting yourself, more importantly, maybe from your perspective, your family and your friends at risk. Ultimately, those who are not vaccinated will end up paying the price.
You are not allowed to infect anybody just because you think you've got rights that are delusional, of course. This delusional, evil idea, you got to identify those people and bring them out into the open so you know who they are. If you're willing to walk among us unvaccinated, you are an enemy.
At this point, staying unvaccinated is like wearing a Yankees hat to a Red Sox game. You're probably going to end up in the hospital, and it's your own damn fault.
I was so worked up over the weekend about this Aaron Rodgers of the NFL. I don't even know where to begin with that story. I mean, this guy, I don't watch football. Sorry, I'm not a big fan. I know the guy's a real good football player. That's why they put up with his bullshit. If I ran the NFL,
he's going to be a Hall.
You came across as a national embarrassment.
He's talking to Aaron Rodgers. You came across as a national embarrassment.
There is no other way around it. It was the most embarrassing performance of Aaron Rodgers' career.
Jeopardy and possibly putting your teammates in jeopardy, to me, is selfish.
I'd give Aaron Rodgers some advice. It would have been nice if he'd have just come to the Naval Academy and learned how to be honest.
Southern California, where as of yesterday, we started giving the vaccine to kids aged 5 and up. Finally, our kids will be able to go to. Let's see.
Woo! Woo! Oh.
I'm not vaccinated.
Oh,
where are you going?
Oh.
I take horse pills.
Yeah, we have to wait for them to be vaccinated because they are selfishly a endangerment to other people, including staff people here. So while we're all hopeful, and I join the president in being hopeful that we can reach a place where it is safe for people to be. What is this, the honor system? The honor system as to whether somebody has been vaccinated? Do you want them breathing in your face on the strength of their honor? So let's just see. Let's just see. I mean, again, this is about science and governance. And science and governance, we have a responsibility to make sure that the House of the Representatives chamber is not a petri dish because of the selfishness of some not to be vaccinated.
Teach people common sense. You need to get she doesn't even know what else to do to get the people of her state to get smart and listen to the facts and get vaccinated so people don't die. It's like that simple. Is it not the people who choose to remain unvaccinated right now who are causing all of this?
It is selfish at this point to not get vaccinated.
If you can be vaccinated and you refuse to, that's a selfish act. You're putting other people's lives and health at risk. You should get vaccinated.
Because frankly, we know that we can't trust the unvaccinated.
Because frankly, we know that we can't trust the unvaccinated.
Because frankly, we know that we can't trust the unvaccinated.
The new cases in COVID are because of unvaccinated folks. But it's time to start blaming the unvaccinated folks, not the regular folks. It's the unvaccinated folks that are letting us down.
The people who are not getting vaccines, who are believing the lies on the internet instead of science, it's time to start shaming them. What else? Or leave them behind. Because they are keeping the majority of Americans behind.
I think I just passed a house with a Halloween yard decoration that was a bunch of skeletons burning an anti-vaxxer at the stake. I'm gonna go.
And so there it is. It says anti-vaxxer right here. Took me a while to see this. That's why I'm pointing it out. And it's got a bunch of skeletons sitting around a campfire roasting a skeleton anti-vaxxer. This is supposed to be a fire, which is pretty effed up. Like, it's really effed up, right? And what my wife pointed out was, what did these guys die from?
Not that Halloween is a contest, but they want it.
It's the platforms like Facebook.
They're killing people. I mean, it really, look, the only pandemic we have is among the unvaccinated. And they're killing people.
What he's saying there is that posting words on social media is killing people. And they've made this like the worst thing. That you're a bad person for posting things that aren't verified by the official story. This is a guy who droned children. He ordered the deaths of children in Afghanistan when he ordered a drone strike on an imaginary enemy to distract from a failed war and a disastrous withdrawal. And so there are horrible things being done all the time. But now they've made posting things on social media one of the worst ones. But it ended up not being true, right? He demonized anti-vaxxers and people who were posting things on the internet, and ended up being him who was the liar and the person that was putting people in jeopardy.
Effects or reactions would be most common from these vaccines?
Well, generally, the most common reaction is what you see with most any other vaccine.
a sore arm, a little bit aches. You might feel a little bit fatigued and down for 24 hours to 36 hours at the most. A small percentage of the people might get a fever that would last for 24 hours. You take a Tylenol, you can take care of that without much problem. The safety of severe adverse events is really very good. In the 30,000 people in the Moderna trial and the 44,000 people in the Pfizer trial, the one we're talking about today, there were really no severe adverse events.
They didn't list any side effects. I mean, that's, a sore arm or, these things. I mean, he's talking about just how you feel after you get the vaccine, not 2 months out or 3 years out or 5 years out. But now we know that there are multiple side effects, which I'll get into after we go through these things here. We know that there is admitted to side effects, things that they're investigating, and things that are related to people dying. And one of the ways we know that they were being deceptive and not saying what some of the side effects were, because they never showed you commercials that came from the pharmaceutical companies themselves. It was social influencers or media personalities or Jojo Magoo. It wasn't Pfizer posting commercials, because if they did that, they would have had to list all the side effects, which we still don't know what those are, right, in terms of what they discovered. And it's still being studied, right? It's not even like they're fully, it's fully been vetted by even the pharmaceutical companies themselves. So this was all lies, right? Again, they lied to people and said that this thing was safe and safer than getting COVID. And, this turned out to be not true, right?
Because frankly, we know that we can't trust the unvaccinated. It's to prevent severe disease, which we don't have data for that for kids. But I guess to me, the risk-benefit calculation looks like this. If the vaccines are safe and the side effects are things like fatigue and headache and muscle soreness at the injection site, I would much rather deal with that for a day or not at all. I mean, most people actually have no side effects. And so I would much rather deal with side effects like that, but understanding that we're giving something that is safe and that can prevent the possibility of something horrible from happening, which is every parent's worst nightmare.
The question asked by the presenter was that because children really weren't dying from COVID, why give them a vax and risk any sort of side effects and things from the vax? And she, of course, said that there was no real side effects from the vax, which we now know is completely false, right? And we know that kids, there's something like 1,500 kids or less than that was the official statistics on the CDC died from COVID. Many of them had severe health issues going into the disease, right? So what she said here is, that she's saying, well, your worst nightmare is your kid's going to die. Again, putting the fear out there. There is a positive association with the word safe. Advertisers and presenters use the word safe to get people to buy their products. Safety is a big thing with people. And when they're scared of something like they were of COVID, and they were offered something that would keep them and their family safe, and they withheld information or out and out lied or, just made false claims with no scientific basis and saying this would keep you safe, then people went and got the vax. And now we know that things are different. And so all these lies and deceptions, and she had the nerve to say the unvaccinated can't be trusted, right? And so the other piece to this, which we now know, and both Bill Gates, I have the memes here, I've saved these things, and Fauci have both admitted that COVID wasn't beaten by the vaccine. The idea that the vaccine would give herd immunity and COVID would disappear because everyone would be vaccinated and they wouldn't get COVID because they had the vaccine, and then, it would just disappear because no one would have it and they couldn't pass it on to other people. This idea of herd immunity through vaccination. We now know that COVID mutated itself out of existence, or mutated itself into a more safer, more contagious form, and that everyone had ended up getting it anyway. So the vaccine turned out to be relatively unnecessary based in what these guys are saying here.
In beating COVID-19, Well, sadly, the virus itself, particularly the variant called Omicron, is a type of vaccine. That is, it creates both B cell and T cell immunity, and it's done a better job of getting out to the world population than we have with vaccines.
I think what one referred to, what was not anticipated, was the extent of the mutations and the amino acid substitutions in Omicron, which is really unprecedented. It kind of came out of nowhere, where you have a virus that has 50 mutations, 30 of which are in the spike protein and 10 or 12 of which are in the receptor binding domain. The thing that's important is that it appears to be able to evade some of the immune protection of things like monoclonal antibodies, convalescent plasma, and the antibodies that are induced by vaccines. That's the sobering news against severe disease. But when you get to Omicron, the protection significantly goes down.
Keeping the events that are safe and also the events that have fun for people too. We can't be canceling everything, especially if we're going to be living with COVID for the foreseeable future. I would say that if you choose to go, make sure that you're vaccinated and boosted. Make sure that you're wearing a mask, even though it's outdoors. If there are lots of people packed around you, wearing a 3-ply surgical mask. Don't wear a cloth mask. Cloth masks are little more than facial decorations. There's no place for them in light of Omicron. And so wear a high-quality mask, at least a 3-ply surgical mask. And if you're going to be visiting elderly relatives.
Recently, when you said here on CNN that cloth masks were, quote, little more than facial decorations. So, in light of Omicron, what kind of mask should we all be wearing? And were you surprised by the pushback from your comments?
Well, I was surprised because this is not the first time that I or Professor Osterholm or really any of us public health experts have been saying that cloth masks are not appropriate for this pandemic. It's not appropriate for Omicron. It was not appropriate for Delta, Alpha, or any of the previous variants either, because we're dealing with something that's airborne. We're dealing with a virus that's extremely contagious. At the very beginning of the pandemic, we didn't know about masking. And then we didn't have enough masks, enough high-quality masks for healthcare workers. And so we were trying to ration those. But then pretty quickly, we recognized that COVID is airborne.
Do you agree with the move?
I do. There was and is a time and place for pandemic restrictions, but when they were put in, it was always with the understanding that they would be removed as soon as we can. And in this case, circumstances have changed. Case counts are declining. Also, the science has changed, but rather that the responsibility should shift from a government mandate imposed from the state or the local district of the school. Rather, it should shift to an individual responsibility by the family, who can still decide that their child can wear a mask if needed.
Take New Jersey, the case in New Jersey, for instance. Their new case average is just over 4,000. Is that an acceptable number to do this, or are they projecting out to March 7th at this point?
I don't think we should be looking at case counts at all at this point, especially when we're dealing with a milder variant and when so many people were exposed to Omicron and therefore have at least some level of protection either through vaccination or immunity. The key number that we should be looking at is hospitalizations. If our ICUs and hospitals in that particular region are not overwhelmed, if they're not over capacity, we can set a number, for example, 75% or 80% full, then we should be able to relax all restrictions. And I actually believe that we should be starting to, with the first restriction removed, should actually be the restriction on children. Because while for adults, you could say, well, what's the harm of adults masking when they go into a grocery store? There actually is a harm that we should be discussing of children continuing to mask. That doesn't mean that masking doesn't have its place for children when there are very high rates of hospitalization. If we get a new variant in the future that children are particularly susceptible to, we may want to bring masks back. But we should also be intellectually honest and say that masking has had a cost, especially for the youngest learners, people with English as a second language, children with learning disabilities. There has been a cost to them. So the risk-benefit calculation has really changed.
But she's had the flu for 14 days. Should she get a flu shot?
Well, no. If she got the flu for 14 days, she's as protected as anybody can be, because the best vaccination is to get infected yourself.
And
so
she should not get it?
If she really has the flu, she definitely doesn't need a flu vaccine.
if she really has the flu.
She should not get it again.
No,
this
she
year?
doesn't need it because it's the most potent vaccination is getting infected yourself.
The current vaccines are not infection blocking. They're not broad, so when new variants come up, you lose protection. And they have very short duration, particularly in the people who matter, which are old people.
I knew these vaccines were not going to protect against infection, and I think we overplayed the vaccines, and it made people then worry that it's not going to protect against severe disease and hospitalization. It will, but let's be very clear. 50% of the people who died from the Omicron surge were older, vaccinated.
Was the Pfizer COVID vaccine tested on stopping the transmission of the virus before it entered the market? If not, please say it clearly. If yes, are you willing to share the data with this committee? And I really want a straight answer, yes or no, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Regarding the question around, did we know about stopping immunisation before it's entered the market? No. We had to really move at the speed of science to really understand what is taking place in the market.
For those of us who weren't vaccinated, right? Those of us who we weren't allowed to talk about it, and we were regularly told we were pieces of shit. So fuck you guys, right? Any of you guys, fuck you guys. Like, we're not over this. Like, in a sense, I don't hold grudges. I don't give a shit. I'm not, everyone's, I'm responsible for myself. But, like, I'm not, angry or hateful. But, it's just all the things about being a truther, all the things that we go through. It's, this is one of the defining moments in our relationships with other people. And, like, you're dead to me. Like, you're just, you're not my concern. Anybody, I've gone through this with my spiritual organization. I've gone through this with, all the things over the years doing this. And it's not about a matter of difference of opinion. It's about you people trying to force, the establishment people trying to force their will on us and make us capitulate to their worldview. Like, it isn't just like we can have our own opinions, because we can't even say our opinions. Censorship has regularly happened. And we're being told all the time we're worthless pieces of shit or whatever. So that's why I go in hard all the time on these people. Like, anybody who's an establishment person, you guys drew first blood. You guys did these things, and, allowing me to say whatever. Whatever it might be. There's nothing that I won't say that's truthful about you. Again, some of it's opinions, and some of it, whatever, it just has to do with this part of you, right? People have different parts of them. Like, let me get into that here in a second. We go back to this thing, but the way that you treated us, and I'm not, like I said, I don't look at myself as a victim. It's a defining moment in our relationship where I'm seeking, my path and my spiritual path and my, whatever truth is, whatever my truth is, and whatever is good for me. And you guys were like, no, you're a piece of shit. You can't do that. I mean, that's what you guys were saying to us in every possible way with your shitty president. And you guys were wrong about everything. And, to do with this and everything else, right? You're consistently wrong. You guys keep on pushing for the beast, for the man, for the establishment. And the establishment, we know, is corrupted. And so people who have the courage to stand up are demonized. Like I was saying in the beginning, we kill our saints. People who speak truth to power are destroyed. And this is what happened to Kyrie Irving. I mean, you guys, went after him in the modern way of destruction. This is the modern way of crucifixion. And again, just mild truth. Like, it's just not even to get into the real spiritual truth. And then stuff with Aaron Rodgers. So, like, you can't say anything. But he said two things I want to show you. Let's go back to these two different clips here. So he said this. This is Ryan Clark saying this here on Twitter.
Because I've been in those locker rooms, and I've talked to people that have been in the locker rooms with you. I have the stories. I have all the things that they said that informed my opinion of who you are.
So Ryan Clark has been saying all year, Aaron Rodgers isn't a good leader, he's not a good teammate, he's not these things. He's saying he talked to some disgruntled people that informs his opinion, doesn't know him. They probably have met very few times, they played against each other. But he doesn't like Aaron Rodgers. Well, first of all, let's go. I'm going to show you one more thing that he says now, and then I'm going to go back and show you something he said about Kirk Cousins.
People are not supposed to be able to do their jobs and do their jobs in an unbiased way and be honest about who you are.
So, you know, it's your opinion of Aaron Rodgers that it's limited because you can't conceive of him because you're an ESPN shill. Like, none of you guys can conceive about what we do here. All of us who are on social media that speak some sort of real truth to power, thoughtful truth, you know, informed truth, and spiritual truth. Like, you're just somebody shilling for Big Pharma and going into locker rooms and getting an opinion. Again, you know, when you call somebody a bad leader and you get into these types of things, right? And if they were winning, the Jets were winning, that would never be happening. So this is just the Jets fell apart this year. And Aaron Rodgers was whatever he was. And so a bunch of people said things about Aaron Rodgers. That's what you're saying. And again, you're not saying who those people are. People who weren't going to come forward and put their name to it. You're saying that you talk to these people, like we can't validate or verify you're doing that and how many people it was. And they're saying Aaron Rodgers is a piece of shit and isn't a good leader, a bad teammate. And then that you say these things. And like that's not, you know, and then you're saying what the truth about who you are. You don't know who somebody is, right? Like, I know you're a piece of shit for pushing all these agendas. I know, like, the stuff, like, there's things about Ryan Clark I just don't like, his personality. But my opinion of him was formed by this thing, if I can find it. What he says about Kirk Cousins, who didn't get the vaccine or whatever it was. Kirk Cousins was saying that he would just get the virus. And this guy went in on him, and I remembered it. And it was one of the early vax things that, you know, was a part of the sports world. So this is from 2020, September, I think, so 2020, September 13th, 2020. And Kirk Cousins said that if he dies, he dies. Kirk Cousins, I'm potentially testing positive for coronavirus. I'm going to write it out. And so I guess he was somebody who was maybe anti the vax. But he said, if I die, I'm going to die, right? So Ryan Clark said this.
I know tough people. I know a ton of tough people. I play with tough people. Many of those tough people that I play with consider me a tough person.
He's big about being a tough guy.
As someone here who has dealt with something that happened on the field that almost cost him his life, I agree with Dan. We are people who like to face adversity, who like to overcome obstacles, who have to prove day in and day out that we are different. Kirk Cousins ain't tough, y'all.
He ain't tough, y'all.
This is not about toughness. Kirk Cousins ain't no tough dude.
He ain't no tough dude.
Played with Kirk. Kirk's a good football player. Kirk's a football player that will stand in and do things that quarterback has to do. If I had 10 people to take with me and say I wanted to take the 9 other toughest people that played on my team, Kirk Cousins wouldn't be in that group.
He's not a tough guy. See, this is what Aaron Rodgers was talking about in terms of slandering people. Kirk Cousins takes some brutal hits. If you saw that show, Netflix Quarterback, and Kirk Cousins was on there. I don't like Kirk Cousins either, but he took some brutal hits. And both him and Aaron Rodgers worked their way back from Achilles injuries, which is tough, right? Which is like they're all, you know, in a way, I mean, in terms of being able to endure the physical pain of football, they're all tough guys to whatever extent, right? Whatever that means. But this isn't what Kirk Cousins was saying about it.
I think when you make statements like this and you pound your chest like this, it doesn't show empathy for the people that have lost their lives to COVID-19. It doesn't show empathy for the people that have...
That's not what he was saying. Kirk Cousins is a Christian, and he was saying that, you know, sometime in life, it's the same thing with football. This guy lost his spleen and his gallbladder to football, right? Which to me is just stupid. That isn't being a tough guy. That's being stupid. There's nothing worse out there you losing parts of your organs for a sport. There's no sport worth that, right? Like there's, you know, it's not worth it for you to suffer that to play a sport, right? I mean, you're going to get injured in these things, but, you know, football is particularly bad, right? But him saying that this is about being a tough guy, Kirk Cousins wasn't saying about being a tough guy. Like they're going out every week and risking their lives, at least their physical health. And with football, it breaks you. These guys are all mangled after football. The longer you play, the more you're mangled. It's a brutal, violent sport, right? And that wasn't what Kirk Cousins was referring to. He's talking about faith, and also it's having faith in whatever medical model that you use, right? And so he got this completely wrong. He made it about being a tough guy. I don't know what the fuck he's talking about, comparing himself. Like, he's a big ego person. This person's, he's always bragging, and, he's just big. I mean, they're all big ego person. He's particularly big. And this was what Aaron Rodgers was referring to, right?
Lost family members. And also when you think about protecting yourself and saying that you don't believe in certain things, if you have compassion, if you care about other people, you're going to do at least what is being mandated of you by the NFL, what's being mandated
this is about the vaccine, right?
Of you by your team, and listen to some of the things that are going on with the reports of what COVID-19 can do to certain people who are predisposed to having this disease take their lives, or having this disease put them in the hospital, and at least try to protect them. And so for me, he can do whatever he wants to do, but I hope that the league continues to take this seriously. I hope that the players continue to take this seriously. This is not a time to judge Kirk Cousins' opinions.
Well, what the fuck do you think you just did, right? You were slamming him and saying he wasn't a tough guy, and you got his opinion wrong. First of all, you didn't understand his opinion. And, this is something I always say, that when I started to go after people and, I started to do what I do here, mock people, I first wanted to verbalize, in the video, or at least know myself, both things, what their opinion was, what their point of view was. Because you really need to know somebody's point of view before you criticize it or mock it or whatever it is, right? And his point of view is, what Aaron Rodgers was saying, you have to understand where that point of view comes from. And so this guy, he bought into the official system model. And because he bought into the official system model, and because ESPN was shilling for this thing, like so many other people were, it was like a gang of people out there who were trying to stomp out and destroy anybody who would verbalize anything against Big Pharma. And Big Pharma and, doctors kill 250,000 people a year, right? Like, you can look that up. That's like a fact, right? It's medical errors, medical-related deaths. And then all the side effects and bullshit that happens from pharmaceuticals. And then the things that go unreported. And all these things that were covered up about people being injured from the bloop, right? And so, I mean, did you look into Damar Hamlin and look at why he had a cardiac arrest and why they're putting defibrillators in schools, Ryan Clark? Did you look at any of that shit, right? And so you just bought into the official story, and you're shilling for the corporations, the big pharma corporations that are paying your salary. And so, that's what the whole thing's about. You're doing it here with Kirk Cousins. And you're lying about judging his opinions. You're totally doing that in a wrong way because you don't even understand what he was saying or where he was coming from.
But it is time to talk about what the ramifications of this type of thought process could be.
But you did zero research on this, right? The guy did zero research. Like, he just took whatever the opinion was of the establishment and went with it, like so many other people. And again, you could do that. I don't care. Take 10 of them. Take 100 of them. Get one every day. Like I said this before. I don't care. In fact, I want you guys to do it. Dive into it, right? But, don't tell us what to do. And that's what happened. People were forced to get the bloop and all that stuff because of these, opinions and all of it. And we paid for it. And we're going to pay for it in terms of health, the side effects and things like that. Like, we're paying for it now, and we're going to be paying for it in the future. And we were demonized for it. So fuck you guys, right? That's the attitude. If you guys don't understand that, like, it's, anybody in the establishment, realize that you took other people's position. I'm not going to get into anything else but this today because it's, this is already, you got a little bit more to say about this, and I'm already over 2 hours. But I'll get into RFK Jr. in the next video because they're going after him now again. Like, they turn on the news and they just keep on saying stuff about that because they're, making up things about his position. That's the other thing. When they lie about your position and then demonize it. And that's what these guys all do in the sports world and this other places. So that's the jumping off point. I want to get to the end of his statement here. But Stephen A. Smith, the reason I found this out was Stephen A. Smith was commenting on that. And I wanted to hear what he had to say because he was, amongst those people. I mean, he said he was a disgrace. You're calling people a disgrace and you're telling them to be ashamed of themselves. Fuck you. Like, this is what they do, right? They say shit like that. You're an embarrassment. Yeah, fuck you, right? You're an embarrassment. You're a shill, and you're bought and sold, right? And so, like, this is, where that's coming from. But first, Stephen A. Smith said about Ryan Clark's take here that, he knew he was going to respond because, what Stephen A. Smith's words, he was a proud black man. Let me show you that. So Stephen A. Smith says these things here, right? He quotes one thing I showed you of Aaron Rodgers. And then he gets into Ryan Clark over here, but he says this.
Yeah, that's just not how he rolls. If you know anything about my man Ryan Clark, he ain't gonna take stuff like that sit down. That's just not how he rolls. To anybody. Especially, he's a proud black man. So you're a white dude coming at him, he's gonna raise his antennas even more. I'm just telling you who I know.
But see, the thing is, you want to make this racial, but you guys have gone after Aaron Rodgers. Ryan Clark doesn't like him because he was, a couple of weeks ago, I saw him talking about Aaron Rodgers being like a bad leader and calling him a fraud and these things, right? But that was, before you guys all went after him, and as a group and as individuals. And so recognize that people get to respond. Like, that's just what happens. People are going to say whatever they're going to say. And everyone has to realize that. That's, you're giving your opinions, you're being harsh about things, and people are going to be upset about it. Like, I get it. Like, that's why I don't get pissed off when people write me, butthurt comments, even though I'm not going after them personally or whatever. They just, people, you voice your opinions, and people are going to say shit, and it's just words. It means nothing, right? But for Aaron Rodgers, and Kyrie Irving, it affected their amount of money they make and their brand and all these things. Nike dropped Kyrie Irving. This segued into the other thing. Everything that Kyrie Irving did, the reaction, he didn't deserve any of it, at least in terms of, maybe a past life thing or whatever it was. But you guys all demonized him because you're shills for ESPN, right? And so to say this is about how a white guy went after him, he went after Aaron Rodgers first and said he verbalized his opinion about him not being a good leader. And Aaron Rodgers said what he thought about you guys, and then you got into it, right? And so let's go back to the other Ryan Clark thing. We'll come back to this thing with Stephen A. Smith if he says anything about the vax. Otherwise, I don't care what he says here.
So people didn't care that you weren't vaccinated. They cared that you were slimy about it.
He wasn't slimy. Like, you're slimy, right? Because you're not representing yourself. Like, that's, again, you're calling him slimy because, what he did, first of all, you were upset at Kirk Cousins for verbalizing something that you thought was dangerous to other people and was insensitive to the people that they lost to COVID. That you were like, oh my God, she should be ashamed of yourself for having that opinion. But then when Aaron Rodgers tried to hide what he did, because he didn't want it to be a thing, he didn't want it to be a distraction, he wasn't looking to make a statement, he wasn't looking to be controversial, they found out because he had to sit out a game. And when he had to sit out a game and realized that he wasn't vaxxed, and that he had said earlier he was immunized by homeopathic remedies, which they don't take seriously. They don't. This is some of his, his new age bullshit, right? That's what they all said. And again, that's not slimy. You can't have it both ways. You can't demonize Kirk Cousins for coming out and saying what he said, and then slam him for, representing bad information like all you guys did. And then when Aaron Rodgers tries to, keep it on the down low, he didn't lie because in his mind, he thought he was immunized. He thought he took something, and he had already had it. And so he's already, like so many other basketball players and people, they had it and they already had natural immunity, but they were forced to take it anyway. So you slimy, you're calling him fucking slimy, right? Like, you don't get it. Like, you're operating on a lower level of consciousness in this thing. You're not able to see that you're shilling for an evil corporation Big Pharma that has done all kinds of damage to people in the medical community, a for-profit medicine, right?
Cared that you were deceitful about it.
And again, he wasn't deceitful. They asked him a question, and he didn't want it to become a thing. You accuse him of being a bad leader, and he said he wasn't, then it would have started off just then. Like, you would treat him any differently? No, you wouldn't have. You'd been slamming him the whole time. It would have been controversial. It would have caused damage to the team. It would have been a distraction. And so you can't fucking make shit up, right? Like, that's not true. You're not speaking truth, right? We all know how it was handled. Back then, we saw what happened to Kyrie Irving. Fuck you, right? Fuck you.
And they cared that you had this air of arrogance when answering the questions about it. And you've kind of only been the only person that's talked about it since. But let me be very...
Are you serious? This has been a constant... He is considered a certain type of person. And so, like, just... You're making shit up. Like, he's... you don't know what it's like to be on the other side. And this is... If you want to talk about being a disenfranchised group, being a group that's prejudiced against, right? And this whole thing with Tuskegee and black people being experimented on, right? So if you're going to... Stephen A. Smith making this racial... But you're on the side of the fucking the people that are demonizing people and dividing people and doing bad shit. Again, there was no risk to other people. I mean, everything you were told about this was wrong, right? And the way they demonized anybody who didn't want to get the vax was horrible, which I showed you the clips. You guys all know, you were there. And so all of us who are on the other side of this, come on, like, you're not being honest about it. You're not being truthful about this.
Very, very clear. My job is to analyze you. You've decided to analyze me. And in analyzing you, what I know is you're...
But you're saying you guys have the same job. You're saying what he's doing on Pat McAfee is the same thing as you're doing. Again, you can't have it both ways. You're talking about being hypocritical. You don't get to have it both ways.
QBR is 21st. Also know that you're the quarterback of a 4-10 team who has to win the last 3 games of the season to even be equal to what last year's team was without you.
Okay, so that, the play is one thing. But you guys criticized him as a person, as a leader, and these other things, right? And so, and again, he gets to criticize you back. Like, you can't, you're saying that it's your job to analyze him. It's your job to say sensational things and then shill for your corporate handlers and the people that tell you what to do at ESPN, your handlers at ESPN. That's what your job is, right? To create buzz, create controversy. And usually that means saying something negative and being hostile and things, saying things like that. If people want to come back at you, they have the total right to do it, right? And you're demonizing all of us anti-vaxxers or all people who didn't get the vax. You guys are all doing that. And so we're not cool with that, right? We're not cool with any of it because you never understood our position. And you should have fought for people's right to express themselves. If you feel like you can express your opinions of Aaron Rodgers, then we can express our opinions of you and the vax and everything else. But we're suppressed and censored. And, all this stuff about marginalized people and shit. The people in the truth community, all of us who, based on our opinions and not buying into a system that lies to us all the time, and that's all factual. Like, that's, everyone knows the system lies. And so, in a medical community that's for profit, right? And so, like, this is just, it's silly. Like, it's a little silly freaking opinions that don't take into consideration anything else but your narcissistic opinion on things.
No, I get it. You get on the show and you talk about my brooch and you curse and all this tough talk. I just need you to know, don't none of that scare me. I'm going to do my job the way I'm supposed to do it.
What do you mean scare you? Like, what, there was no threats there.
I feel no way about not being able to talk about what the film says because of what my career was. And if you continue to be arrogant or smug or hypocritical and it pertains to my job, I'm going to do it. And I want to remind you again, I'm Ryan Clark.
Who are you?
13 years, Emmy
Wait, what's your credentials, Ryan?
Winner, host of an Emmy-nominated podcast.
So this is the external validation for shit, right? Like, this is needing external validation. This is the whole thing, and Aaron Rodgers is whatever he is, right? Like, these guys are all, that's part of the external validation is part of this thing. Wanting championships. I mean, that's why these guys are sacrificing their bodies. When you look at former players of sports, all of us athletes and kids who played sports dreamt of playing professional sports. And I had some athletic ability and some dreams about it. But I just really didn't have the drive for it and, whatever. It wasn't my thing. My soul wasn't endorsing it. And I'm glad now because, like, I have some minor injuries that are there, things from wear and tear on my body from playing sports. If I had played it on that kind of level, you're going to be in pain and suffer for the rest of your life. Your body's broken. And you put up so much of your life's energy into the sport, right? Especially now with it's, their whole focus where you have to be, the level of play has gone up to the extent, people are spending all this money on, all this time and money. Like LeBron James spends like $1.5 million on his body every year just to keep him going and, to perform on a high level. And so, that's your life's energy goes into that, and then you don't have anything left for when you get older. That's why a lot of these athletes, you look at them, they're like zombies, and they're physically broken. This guy's missing 2 internal organs, right? And the price isn't worth it. And, it is what it is. But, they needed external validation, and that's whatever it is, right? But when you get into character and you get into people's, difference of opinions and the war that's existing between, I don't want to call it a war because we have no weapons. Like we have just a limited, capacity as truthers to sort of figure out where and when and how to put out our opinions that are being suppressed and being demonized because the establishment of the beast can't handle dissension because it's a system that is predicated on illusion and perception, right? So we're all dealing with that, which these guys, none of them know because they're all shills for the official story. But if this guy didn't sign a contract with ESPN and he goes off on his own, then his opinions will be different. Like he goes off on his own podcast where he doesn't have to worry about losing his job at ESPN. You notice that like these people who start going into our arena, they all of a sudden start saying things that they wouldn't say on ESPN, right? And so what Aaron Rodgers was saying, who are you shilling for? And it's Big Pharma.
Speaking of that jealousy and guest stuff, The Rock, Kevin Hart, Mike Tomlin, Devontae Adams, Joe Burrow, Shaq, just to name a few. No money, just relationships, conversations, and respect. It's what I tried to give you, and we'll keep it that way as long as you want it like that. Appreciate you.
Okay, so what he said at the end, Ryan Clark, I just want to clarify this. I assume those were all people, Shaq and Joe Burrow or whoever else he said, Devontae Adams, came on his show and were interviewed. And they didn't ask for money for the interview. And so he's taking a shot at Aaron Rodgers for being paid by Pat McAfee. But if you saw the Pat McAfee show, Pat McAfee, it came out that Aaron Rodgers was being paid. And people went off on that, and there's a whole thing about it, right? And then Pat McAfee came out and said that Aaron Rodgers didn't receive a dime from him, but then he got a $500 million deal from ESPN. $500 million deal from ESPN, Pat McAfee did, because his show was so successful, right? And so he said to Aaron Rodgers, I want to give you some money because a big part of my success is that you came on every Tuesday during the controversy with the vax, and his ratings like skyrocketed. And it gave Pat McAfee relevance. And Aaron Rodgers didn't want to take the money at first, but Pat McAfee pressured and said, like, this is just, you deserve it. And Pat McAfee said that he rewarded all the people on the show. They're all like, he's paid them well. All the people that have helped him, he's got all these staff people. Like he says that I, share this stuff. It's just not me getting $500 million. And that, all the people that help me get rewarded. And so, like, that's not, criticize Aaron Rodgers for being paid. He was just going on being interviewed, and then the whole thing happened where Pat McAfee, all the things I said. And so it's disingenuous to say that, right? But Stephen A. Smith says this.
Mistake number 2, you brought up the vax status. Because evidently Aaron Rodgers feels that anybody who took the vaccine, their opinions are to be dismissed. Because there's so much that we've learned about the whole COVID vaccine and everything that transpired during that time.
So if you saw my video the other day, Stephen A. Smith going at Kyrie Irving and then getting personal with him and continue to get into him and going after him because he was getting Kyrie Irving's dad and him got into it, right? Which was, he was using his platform to basically bully Kyrie Irving and disparage him because of a personal beef, and he had to come out and apologize for that. But, he's not getting this thing right. And what anybody who, knows what we went through as anti-vaxxers, and I didn't go through anything. I mean, being honest, like, it didn't affect me at all. because people's opinions I don't respect and don't care about. It didn't affect my personal life, right? But I know how we're treated in general. Well, I was censored though. I got community guideline strikes. I just got one, faultily. Fortunately, YouTube repealed it on that old video I put up of this, where I said that I wasn't in the beginning of the video. I say I'm not commenting on the vaccine or any of these things. I'm just commenting on the way people were treating anti-vaxxers, right? I made that clear in that video a long time ago, but I still, because YouTube was the bots suck and all these things, I got rid of all that stuff. But I made it public, and within 3 or 4 hours, it was already got a community guideline. They didn't give me a strike; it just removed the content. But I fought it, and they looked at it, and they repealed it, right? So that's on my other channel. But that's how we were treated, where we couldn't talk about our point of view, and there was only one official point of view, which turned out, which he's even kind of acknowledging now was wrong. But what's more important is your company was making money off of these big pharma, and that guides your opinion. You had an establishment opinion. And so Aaron Rodgers was demonized. He went from being someone who did a few weird things, but he was a great player and was mostly celebrated. And Stephen A. Smith always celebrated him, right? He always said good things about Aaron Rodgers. Then Aaron Rodgers said this thing with the immunization, and he ended up being Kyrie Irving, which was wrong. Like, that was wrong. What you guys did there was just fucking wrong. And you guys should man up and say, every one of you guys should man up and say what we did was wrong, right? The way that you treated Kyrie Irving and then Aaron Rodgers, because it pertained to your, the establishment. This is the evil fucking big pharma. This is the villains. If you don't believe that this one thing was bad, there's plenty of other side effects. And, big pharma is known for overcharging people and putting out fucking shit that's bad for people. Over 200 medications cause suicidal ideation and or depression, or both. And or depression. I don't need to say or both. And so it's not a mistake. What he said, we all understand it. Like, you don't get it. You and Ryan Clark don't get it. That's the problem. If you got it, you wouldn't be saying this shit, right? You'd realize where this is coming from, especially coming from a person that feels like they're disenfranchised because of race, right? Like, when you feel like you're being, the powers that be are prejudiced against you, and your group of people, your demographic, none of you guys stood up for the anti-vaxxers. None of you cared about the way we were being treated. Wrongly fucking treated, right? That was your chance to make a stand for, if you're against a behavior, which is where the establishment demonizes a group of people, then you're against it in all forms. And otherwise, then shut up about it, because you only care about what's being happening to you or your group, right? Like, all these people couldn't wait to pile on the anti-vaxxers and, all the stuff that was being said.
That conspiracy theorists at the time, the Aaron Rodgers, the Kyrie Irvings, and others, ended up looking a lot better later on. And in fairness, a lot better than the rest of us, myself.
Good you're saying that, because that's what's truth. But that's not enough, because, like, you guys fucked it, right?
Included. Here's the flip side.
There's no flip side. That's it. No fucking flip side, bro. Zero flip side. You guys fucking treated anti-vaxxers, and these guys particularly, like shit, and you were fucking wrong, and you demonized them, and you don't realize the damage that was done and the kind of energy that was there, and, like, have never made amends, right? So fuck that. Like, there's no flip side.
Ryan Clark pointed out it wasn't that you took the vaccine or that you didn't take the vaccine. Is that he used the word slimy. I'm saying you were lying.
He didn't lie.
You said you were immunized.
Yeah, but he said he was immunized, which for him he was. He wasn't lying, right? And if he didn't lie, the way you treated Kyrie Irving would totally excuse it. Like, you don't fucking lie, or the politicians don't lie, or everyone doesn't lie, right? Fucking, like, and it wasn't a lie to hurt people, especially when you guys would have said, him coming out and saying, I don't believe in the vaccine, would have been, like, horrible, right? It would have been like, he's killing people. Like, all the fans of Aaron Rodgers that believe in him, he's killing people. All these people will die because Aaron Rodgers said that. Like, if he came out and said that shit, you would have said he was a fucking murderer, right? Like, he was going to kill people because of that. And that was the words that were being said. So you can't fucking erase the circumstances. But you're also dismissing non-allopathic medicine. Because Aaron Rodgers said he took a homeopathic. And again, these other things that were being taken that now have been validated as working, right? And so, you know, for me, I didn't take any of it. And I got it, and I survived it, and I'm healthier now because of it, right? And I don't have the whatever side effects that were there from the whatever it is. We all were betting on what we believed in. At least some of us. Some of us just marched in and did what we were told without thinking about it. And so don't pretend that Aaron Rodgers was being slimy or being lying or being a piece of shit. It's totally reasonable what he said. And from his point of view, he wasn't lying because he thought he was immunized. He believed in what he took, right? It's like you saying you were immunized and then you getting COVID. Were you immunized? No, you got it. You took the vax and then you got COVID, right? Those people who did that. And so Aaron Rodgers never got it after that. I don't believe he got it, right? I think he had it. He took the homeopathic and then he didn't get it since then. And so maybe he was immunized, right? At least he didn't get COVID, or if he did, it was a mild version. Like, I didn't hear about him getting COVID. I can look that up. It doesn't really matter, but that's, reality. And so that isn't, you guys, it wasn't just about him lying. You made that about that. But if he told what you guys consider the truth and he came out and said it, you guys would have said in on him any fucking way. And so that was the fucking, hypocrisy of what you're saying now, all you guys. And you were wrong. You were fucking all wrong. Like, admit you were wrong, put your tail between your legs, and take it like a fucking man. Like, you were wrong, and you said shit, and you were fucking a total dick to Kyrie Irving about this stuff.
You gave the impression that you were vaccinated, and you didn't man up and state, no, I didn't take the vaccine. And
it wasn't manning up. It was the whole thing would have been a distraction. It would have been a negative thing on their season. They had Super Bowl aspirations, right? And, the reason for doing it, I've already said this over and over again. Don't need to say it again.
Guess what? As an NFL player, Aaron Rodgers didn't have to take the vaccine. You would have still been allowed to play. So there was no reason to give the impression that you were vaccinated.
There was total reason to do it. There was a total. Did you not see what Kyrie Irving experienced? Like, you guys made an example of Kyrie Irving, and you were shilling for Big Pharma doing that. And you were, people were saying, my God, I don't want to experience what Kyrie Irving did. So be honest about it. Don't fucking lie. Like, that's just a fucking lie.
In fact, you weren't. And you being seen
Okay, so again, this is, I don't even know if I can use all this because they copyright the shit out of you on ESPN. But, like, this is just their, like, again, you just admitted you were wrong, but you don't admit to the gravity of the damage you caused to people. People lost their jobs. People have been injured. And you're not looking into it now, right? Because Kyrie Irving and Aaron Rodgers look better because you were wrong and you pushed for something in a way because you were shilling for ESPN, which is a fucking corporate-owned piece of shit organization that gets money from other corporate-owned piece of shit organizations like Pfizer and other big pharma institutions. And so, like, that's the reality of the situation. Like, just you man up, right? Man up and say more about, like, how you got personal with Kyrie Irving and his dad when you started off wrong in the first fucking place, right? I mean, the way they treated Kyrie Irving was horrible. And it was every fucking day. And then it segued into the whole thing where he shared something on social media and they called him anti-Semitic even though he didn't say anything. A video that's still up on Amazon. If it was so bad, why didn't Amazon take it down? They didn't go after Amazon, which is a corporation. They get Amazon to take the video down. They went after Kyrie Irving, and he lost, again, the whole ordeal. He probably lost somewhere around $70 million or something, right? He lost $17 to $20 million from the fines for not playing because he couldn't play home games. He lost another $5 million in fines for posting something on social media, and he was suspended for 5 games by the Brooklyn fucking Nets, who sucked and were horrible on this whole thing. And the way he was treated was bad. And you guys were all in the wrong, and you guys should do nothing but celebrate, not even just apologize to him, but also celebrate him being a fucking hero because he stood up for something he believed, and he ended up being right on top of it. Like, it was a personal cost to him. And so, these guys, man, you guys all know how it was. Like, don't pretend it wasn't that way. Like, we all know how it was. And don't pretend it wasn't that way, right? You guys, it was a fucking witch hunt. And call it what it was, a belief system witch hunt where we ended up being right and the way you guys treated all of us was wrong. And it's not just about apologizing and admitting you're wrong. It's about questioning everything and the authority and not falling for. You guys do the same thing again because you keep on doing it one way or another. You can't wait till somebody makes a mistake or you perceive they're making a mistake and you guys just devour them because you want, ratings, right? And so it's a horrible way to be. It's it's a low thing. Okay, so this has been a weird video. I was going to end it there, but I have a few more things to say about it. The first of all, this position that Stephen A. Smith is saying, and Ryan Clark was saying that Aaron Rodgers was lying. They decide to attack him for lying and dismissing and forgetting all the other things that went along with that, right? And, I don't believe Aaron Rodgers is lying here, but, this is, first of all, they're lying about, they're misrepresenting the conditions in the climate. They're forgetting and not seeing all the criticism and all the hatred that was put on anybody who was anti-vax at the time, particularly anybody famous, and all the other things that went with it. They're lying when they said, we didn't care whether you got vaxxed or not, but we just cared that you lied. That's bullshit, right? That's it's all bullshit. But then there's the institutional lying, and that's what I want to cover here, because I don't think I've talked about that before, right? And so what we were told by the powers that be. Now, Fauci came out and later said this was Fauci's excuse, that the science at the time, the data at the time, and again, it's not science until it's proven. So, but he was saying the data at the time was telling us this. And so when we said the things that were available according to the data, and we ended up being wrong, it's because we didn't have enough data and we didn't have the ability to analyze the data correctly or whatever it was, right? But that's bullshit, because what they said was this. And you saw my clip from that woman from Pfizer who was, in the clip I showed you, the compilation, that guy, that foreign guy, the government or whatever it was for the EU, he was from Poland or something, and he asked the woman from Pfizer, who was English, if they ever had tested to see if it prevented COVID, the vax, if it prevented COVID, and they said no. She said no. It was the first time that was admitted publicly. And so this is the lies we were told based on that. They first said that if you took the vax, you wouldn't get COVID. And so everybody who took the vax with this idea that they wouldn't get COVID at all, that was huge. That was a big deal. And then they said, well, you'll get it, but it won't be as bad. And you won't get really sick. And then they said, well, you get it, it might be bad, but you won't go to the hospital. And then they said, well, if you take it, you'll go to the hospital, but you're not going to die. And then they said, well, you're going to die, but you're probably less likely to die. And then there was no proving any of that shit, right? And they hadn't tested for any of those things. So all these claims they made in the beginning and saying that if you didn't take it, you were going to be more likely to contribute to somebody else dying or more likely to die yourself, these things. And everybody who repeated that bullshit is lying, right? Because just because you're not aware and you're trusting a particular source, when you repeat something that somebody else says is a lie, then you're lying. And we all do that. We all, we think that we know something or we believe somebody else, or we've all done that. We've all repeated things that aren't true. Either we didn't have the capacity to do the research, or we didn't have the time or effort, or even if we did the research, we couldn't come up with the answer. Anything to do with science, I don't have the ability to read scientific data or collect scientific data, so I have to assess other people's reliability, and they have none of it because scientists can lie just like everybody else. And lying for them is either fudging their research, giving faulty research, or misrepresenting the research and not telling the truth or not reading it correctly. And then they can just make up any kind of bullshit excuse, right? But all these people that were told by ESPN and their handlers over there to go out and say these things, and it was the position of their company, and they had to do that. Well, they were making a choice based in their job, right? Like people were threatened, they would be fired if they didn't get the vax, these things. And they all capitulated, they all went along with it. And, that's fine. They can do that. That's your choice. But then they went after those of us who didn't. and Aaron Rodgers and Kyrie Irving, right? And, these are the types of lies where you don't know anything about something, but you're just repeating somebody else's bullshit or your corporation's bullshit. And you think that you're somehow free from it, like you're Pontius Pilating it, like you're washing your hands of the lies. Well, I don't know. This is what I was told by my authority. And you're still responsible for the bullshit that you say, right? And everybody does it. Like we've all been indoctrinated with things. All the people that say, all the Christians who say you're going to hell if you don't accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. Again, this isn't something provable, but I know that not to be true. My mom, I talked about this in recent videos. We were in Canada, in Ottawa, I think it was, and there was these native peoples there. We were at some kind of area where there's these native peoples doing a dance, and my mom was like, "Oh, they're so beautiful people. I can't believe that they would be going to hell." Like she was questioning the Christian Catholic upbringing in the Bible because she saw these people and she's like, "These people aren't going to hell." Like I don't believe that. Like she wouldn't, she didn't believe some part of her, the fundamental teachings, and so for her, she was willing to face the truth based on her evidence. She was able to see that these people weren't going to hell, right? She could see that they were spiritual people, even though they weren't doing the Christian religion. And, she had seen this before. Obviously, this was something she was battling with because she wanted to believe in her faith and her teachings and her Bible. But she also was seeing evidence that there was people who were also spiritual, which is what the Catholic Church was confronting in that, in that fictional Catholic Church. And these people, these cardinals, these fake cardinals in this movie, the conclave, right? The church recognizing these other paths are also a way to connect to God. And so God is in everybody, and recognizing that, like even people that we think are evil, divinity, they can't exist without divinity. And sometimes people are, I've said this before, if destruction is happening, if World War III is supposed to happen and destruction is necessary for this this abomination of a system that we have that needs to be taken down, and souls, higher developed souls come in, saintly souls, and incarnate as world leaders and people that are end up going to facilitate this destruction, then they're doing God's work. And they have nothing to be ashamed of. They'll be remembered as villains in history and things, but sometimes these villains are highly developed souls that are doing work that has to be done, destructive work. And so, we might criticize them and call them bad people, but in reality, they're congruent with what their soul sent them down here to do, right? And that's why I said everyone's, I take everything with a grain of salt in terms of all this stuff, because everyone has to find their own personal way and their own whatever it is, right? But in all that, going back to my initial point, there are things that we repeat that are lies and we don't even know they're lies, or we just trust some other authority. And even, sometimes just our attitude towards our language is a lie, right? I've been watching these movies where they're foreign movies and they dub in voices of people. They usually have a little accent. I watched this Norwegian movie from Norway, was it? Something. That was called La Palma. And it's a really bad movie. It's an island in Spain that's about to have a tsunami. And it's these people, and you can see their political agenda, the Greta Thunberg thing, that because of climate change, there's more rainfall, and the rainfall is eroding the mountain, and which is going to cause the tsunami, right? Like they had to bring in global warming, right? And there's a family there, and the daughter's 17 years old. She's, spoiler alert, these are all, it's not worth watching. And she's, grasping with her being a lesbian and telling her parents, like, it's this whole kind of, all the liberal things you associate with European, but it's also happening with American television, that kind of stuff. But like there's so many plot flaws, but it's the conversations that I'm interested in. The way they express themselves, some of the things that seem childish and obvious. Like there's, America is an immature country, but in some ways our dialogue and our, our level of, there's just a level of, I don't know if we call it maturity or maybe even cynicism, but some of these things are just so like, what are the audiences? They're like little children almost, like some of the things that you watch these foreign movies and you see the dialogue and some so simplistic. And, I'm wondering what the consciousness is like of the people. Like, here's an example of this. So there's a young woman there's two storylines. There's the family, and then there's this young woman who is become a geologist, and she's specialized in getting her master's degree in whatever, doctorate in. She's doing an internship at this place that reads the the seismic activity. And she figures out, because of global warming, that there's a crack in the island, and it looks like there's going to be a volcano, and it's going to fall off, and global warming has caused it, right? And the reason she got into it was her and her brother were in a tsunami, and their parents put them up on a roof of something, and then, like the Titanic, got washed away. So her and her little brother were saved. And her brother's a real fuck up, and he's kind of mooching off of her. And like he's not getting his life together, and they're both traumatized by losing their parents. And her brother goes out and, he takes some of her money and rents a boat where he's supposed to be getting vegetables. And he goes out and he's swimming with the turtles. And he goes, the turtles are all disappearing. So like there's that. And so as the storyline goes forward, like she comes out and realizes that the place is going to have a tsunami. And she goes to talk to her brother. Instead of saying, look, I want you to leave because there's going to be a tsunami, she goes, I just can't worry about you, and you're mooching off of me. And she just lets into him and tells him she wants him out of her life. Like, instead of being honest, and then he gets all pissed off at her. He's walking away, and she goes, well, you got to leave because there's a tsunami. And he goes, wait, you're willing to lie about that, our childhood trauma, just to get me out of your life? And so, like, he storms off. Like, it's just some of the conversations and lack of, it's just bad. Like, it's just bad story writing and, not how people would act. And then, but again, this is this foreign stuff. And so then she sees her brother, and she's trying to get off the island because now it's really going south. Like, she's been ordered by her boss to get off the island because it's, the tsunami's coming, the earthquake is definitely coming. And she goes, sees her brother. He's coming out of a bar, and he's being arrested by cops. And she tries to intervene, and she accidentally hits a cop in the face. And they go off her brother and let him go, even though they're about to arrest him. And they arrest her and take her off. It makes no sense, right? And then she's stuck in jail, and there's a warning, and there's sirens, and there's the volcano's active, is exploding. And the woman won't let her out of jail until one of her colleagues comes in, and the brother's frantic trying to get her out of jail. And one of her colleagues says, oh, we got a boat, we got to get out of here. So she leaves the keys. And so he unlocks her jail cell, and she comes out, and there's another guy who looks kind of, like a real criminal, and they let him out. He grabs the keys, and he says, fuck off. And he goes and gets some guns and stuff. And they run and find the father of the other family that's kind of the main story people. And they make it down to a boat where the guy was going out to get the turtles, and they're about to leave the island. And the guy shows up, they let out of jail. There's a few times where it just wouldn't have happened that quickly. And then, all the conversations they're having when they have 10 minutes before the tsunami hits, and they're in conversations about what they should do, and then they're expressing emotions. Like, there's a time where, like, you can see that death is right there, and they're delaying, like this. This happens in lots of movies, but it was particularly bad in this one. And so her brother ends up fighting the guy and gets shot. And he's laying there on the bed. He's laying there on the ground, dying. And his sister comes up, and he says to her, "The turtles were right all along." And he dies. And so like the way people perceive reality is skewed by their culture. Like, and then the end of the movie, she, after the tsunami, she goes and scuba dives. She goes snorkels with the turtles, and she hear her brother talking, and he's like, the turtles are more ancient than we are. They've been here longer than we are, and they knew what we didn't know, and we got to start listening to nature. And like this whole, there's all that Greta Thunberg type of stuff in there, all that stuff, right? There are, liberal positions in these European countries. But, we're fed lies our whole life. We're indoctrinated by lies, the whole Santa Claus fraud. I mean, that's a big, massive lie that is perpetrated against kids and all these things, right? And, people know about, we all know about, it's there for all of us to see, right? It's, it's a part of our existence. And so, when you call somebody out to being a liar like these guys are, for Aaron Rodgers, and again, like it's, we're all liars, but that thing didn't even seem like a real lie because in his belief system, he believed he was immunized. Like he knew that what they thought, like in the sense it was deceptive was he said what he believed. Yeah, I'm immunized. And somebody asked him if he got vaccine, right? And if he had said no, we all know what had happened, and they're being dishonest about that, right? But it's true to the extent that he knew that they thought something else. Like he was saying something, which is, a little bit crafty, but it's smart. Like, I don't have a problem with him doing it. I would have liked him to do what Kyrie Irving did, but he didn't. Like, he would have been more heroic if he had done what Kyrie Irving did and just come out and say it. But we all saw what happened to him, right? But it isn't a big fucking deal, and you don't get to destroy somebody just because of whatever happened there. When everything that Disney and ESPN do and all these corporations and what America is, it's all lies. It's just, political lies and all the lies that people say. And, these guys spin things all the time where they create a story or a controversy, where they used to do this on American Idol. Like they would script fights between the judges. And they do that on all of Simon Cowell's shows where the judges banter back and forth and criticize each other. They've carried that on to these other shows like The Voice and all those shows. I don't watch those shows, but it's like, that goes on because it's a part of what they do because they know it drives ratings. And they do the same thing where, if what they were saying is truth, then they would all agree on it, right? Whether they predict one team's going to win or one team's going to lose, or they have a take about what happened in the game or some player, they go after each other on the show, which means that it isn't truth. It's just, people bullshitting about their own, it's just bullshit. It's just their opinions and talking just to talk. It has no bearing on the outcome of the sporting events. And, it's just entertainment of people creating drama and arguing and having conflict and mocking each other and making fun of each other. That's what these shows revolve around. And it just is what it is. And people, you make a lot of money for it and, it's a living. But, you can't be considered a person who's a vector of truth or anything like that, right? Because you're creating, illusionary narratives and bullshit stuff that are only based in a desire for ratings and interest and attention, right? So, these behaviors make you, as a profession, just a lying piece of shit, right? This is what the mainstream media does. The mainstream media reports things that aren't true. They take things out of context. They report things that the government, the intelligence community tells them, and then they give these bullshit opinions about it, and backed by the corporate handlers and the network and the limited amount of bandwidth that they're willing to tell you, right? And anybody who breaches that bandwidth is considered, a piece of shit conspiracy theorist. And, regardless of what they believe personally and what they're willing to say and, what they're willing to deceive their public about, which is the exact same thing they're accusing Aaron Rodgers of doing. But Aaron Rodgers wasn't doing it as a job. Somebody asked him a question. He was put in a bad position because he knew if he said what his vaccine status was actually, he knew the consequences. And so he chose, a sort of a tactful, slightly deceptive, but, maybe truth to him, but not truth to these people, this reporters. But, their whole life is a lie, right? This is stuff they do all the time, and they're criticizing him, but they live in deception. Because oftentimes when these guys actually leave their jobs, just like with Chris Cuomo and Don Lemons, they're saying, yeah, I was censored. I wasn't able to speak my truth. And so if all these people feel that way, and you don't hear about it till they lose their jobs, then they're actively deceiving you based in this corporate deception that's happening there, which means that, they're worthless and they need to go down with the Titanic. You're making a choice between being one of them or being one of us, right? One of them is Trump is one of them, right? People think he's not, but he is. They're all, the Fox is one of them and MSNBC, all these networks and all the people that work there. And, if you want to be one of us, then you have to face the wrath that the corporate beast, the beastly system will give to you when you denounce it. And, none of these people are willing to do that because they want their, high-paying jobs and these things. And so, don't pretend like you're truth tellers, right? And the whole thing is, and don't pretend you're not trying to force the corporate agenda on other people and shill for it, because that's exactly what you're doing. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely important for the apocalypse. And the Ascension, everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.